critical thinking. Whether you're looking to improve your decision-making, solve problems more effectively, or simply understand the world around you with greater clarity, this guide offers practical insights and tools to enhance your analytical abilities. Through chapters like The Seed of Curiosity, Building a Foundation, and The Art of Observation, we explore fundamental aspects of critical thinking. We'll delve into the importance of questioning assumptions, gathering evidence, and synthesizing information, all while highlighting the role of creativity and ethics in our thought processes. As we navigate through real-life applications, from decision-making dilemmas to effective communication in relationships, this audiobook is designed to be both informative and engaging. It's a comprehensive resource that encourages continuous learning and growth, preparing you to face the complexities of modern life with confidence and clarity. Join us as we unlock the power of critical thinking. Let's begin. Chapter 1: The Seed of Curiosity. Embracing questions, my journey begins. My name is Sarah, and if there's one thing you should know about me, it's that I've always had an insatiable curiosity, a relentless itch to ask why, from the moment I could string sentences together. As a child, I would pepper my parents and teachers with questions that often left them scratching their heads or stumped for answers. While my peers lost themselves in the latest toys or games, I found my greatest solace in exploration through inquiry. Perhaps it was the thrill of discovery, or maybe the comfort of knowing that each question could take me on a journey to understanding the world, a journey that would become the cornerstone of my life. Take, for example, that one hot summer afternoon when I was 8. I remember lying in the grass, staring up the clouds, and asking my mom, "Why do they float?" That innocent question spun into an entire afternoon of discussion about the water cycle, climate, and the nature of air itself. What started as mere curiosity morphed into a passion for science, exploration, and eventually the questions that would shape my understanding of existence. Each question I embraced led me further down a rabbit hole of knowledge, where the answers often sparked yet more questions, creating an endless loop of exploration that electrified my mind. But as I grew older, I found myself at a crossroads, not just with questions, but with the societal expectations weighing heavily on my shoulders. My peers were diving headfirst into the status quo, pursuing conventional career paths, and adhering to the unspoken rules of society that dictated how success looked. Meanwhile, I grappled with feelings of inadequacy, my questions feeling more like burdens than the joyful pursuits they once were. Yet, in those moments of self-doubt, I made a choice. I decided to embrace my questions. They became my compass and a powerful tool for self-discovery. I learned that critical thinking was not only encouraged, but necessary to carve a unique path in a world that often stifles individuality. I began chasing answers, not just to satisfy curiosity, but to uncover who I truly was meant to be. Eventually, this journey led me to profound insights that changed the course of my life. Each question betrayed my fear and uncertainty, but also ignited a fire within me, a yearning for truth, purpose, and connection. I started to recognize the strength in questioning, realizing that every person, young or old, would benefit from embracing this art. Lives could be transformed through inquiry. It was the first step towards understanding oneself and the world. Yet, as I immersed myself in this newfound understanding, I discovered that this journey was not without tension. The moment came when I had to confront my deepest fears. And so, standing at the edge of a decision, between comfortable conformity and the unknown path of my authentic self, I took a breath, embraced the questions swirling in my mind, and threw myself into the uncertainty. The journey was just beginning, filled with the kind of tension that comes from breaking free from expectations and diving headfirst into a sea of unknown possibilities. Would I find my answers, or would I uncover even more questions that challenged everything I thought I knew? The thought was exhilarating, and soon my heart raced with anticipation for what lay ahead. The power of why. It was a chilly Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the sun fought valiantly against the overcast sky, trying to burst through the gray, like an artist desperate to salvage the last brushstrokes of a fading masterpiece. I found myself seated in the lecture hall, nestled comfortably between my friends Jake and Emma. The topic of discussion? the importance of adhering to established norms, a rather unexciting subject that struck a chord of complacency among my classmates. But as the professor droned on, the familiar hum of indifference sparked something in me. I realized this was my moment to question the status quo, to ask a simple yet profound question: why? With a lingering sense of bravado, I raised my hand, feeling the weight of the room's anticipation. The professor, perhaps surprised by my eagerness, called on me, and I dove into my argument about how blindly following conventional wisdom stifled creativity and innovation. But why must we adhere to these norms? I asked, my voice holding firm. The silence that followed was palpable. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. I glanced at Jake, who sat with an eyebrow raised, a mix of curiosity and mischief dancing in his eyes. Emma, ever the thoughtful one, nodded slowly, as if my question had unraveled a hidden thread in a tapestry she had taken for granted. Once I posed that initial why, it became contagious. Classroom discussions were no longer a series of monotonous recitations, but a vibrant exchange of ideas, animated debates that flickered like fireflies in the dusk. After class, as we gathered at our usual coffee spot, Jake couldn't help but tag onto my momentum. "So, why is success defined by societal standards?" he quipped, a devilish grin spreading across his face. Emma leaned in, sipping her latte, her eyes alight with the glint of engagement. "And why do we prioritize certain forms of knowledge over others?" she added, pushing her thick-framed glasses up her nose. Each inquiry sparked new layers, bringing depth to our conversations, challenging our perspectives, and inviting a kaleidoscope of thoughts. As these discussions continued, I began to realize the transformative power of why. It was not merely about undermining authority or questioning elders. It was about cultivating a culture of curiosity, one that encouraged us to dig deeper into our beliefs and experiences, much like archaeologists unearthing ancient ruins. Yet, as we ventured further into these uncharted territories of thought, the depth of our conversations revealed a growing tension. What if we unearthed ideas that contradicted our core values? What if the whys led us to uncomfortable truths? That night, I lay awake pondering the implications of our debates, of where asking why might lead us. The following day, I found myself reconvening with Jake and Emma in our usual corner of the coffee shop, surrounded by the comforting aroma of roasted beans. I mentioned my concerns about the direction our discussions were taking, expressing a fear that perhaps we were dismantling truths we never meant to challenge. My voice was laced with uncertainty, and for the first time, there was hesitance behind our playful banter. But just as we began to spiral into doubt, Jake leaned over the table, contagious enthusiasm etched across his expression. "Isn't that the point?" he said. "Why shouldn't we question our truths? Is growth not born from discomfort?" I felt a tingling sense of revelation. Yes, growth did require a willingness to confront discomfort, to sit with uncertainty. Maybe that was the crux of it. The power of why lies not just in its capacity to challenge, but in its insistence on exploration, a call to adventure into the realms of understanding, however uneasy it may feel. Despite the tensions swirling around us, it became apparent that we owed it to ourselves and to each other to continue asking why and to embrace the complexities that came with it. We knew we were entering a labyrinth of our beliefs, where the path would twist, turn, and sometimes lead us astray. But as we laughed and exchanged ideas, I felt an unwavering bond solidify between us, a fellowship forged in the fires of inquiry. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once, illuminating a truth I would carry into the future. The power of why was not only about seeking answers, but also forming connections that were richer, more profound, more human, finding wonder in everyday life. It was a typical Tuesday, or at least I thought it was. The sun crept through the blinds, casting striped shadows across my bedroom floor as the incessant chirping of birds nudged me awake. Groggily, I stumbled through my morning routine, brushing my teeth, pouring cereal, brewing coffee. In those familiar motions, I felt a dullness settle over me, a sense that life had become a blend of repetitive tasks rather than a canvas of wonder waiting to be explored. That was until Mia burst into my life like a comet streaking across a starless sky. Mia and I had been friends since childhood, our shared affinity for adventure binding us together. But lately, she had taken on a new role, the enthusiastic optimist who saw beauty in the mundane. It was as if she wore rose-tinted glasses all the time, finding joy in objects and moments that I had long overlooked. I remember her saying, "Every day is a page waiting to be written." Intrigued, I decided to embark on this journey with her, to uncover the magic in everyday life. One afternoon, we decided to take a simple walk to the local coffee shop. What could be more mundane than that? But what unfolded was anything but ordinary. With Mia's infectious spirit, our stroll transformed into a quest. Each step was punctuated by her curiosity. "Do you think that cloud looks like a dinosaur?" Or, "Look at that vine climbing the wall. Isn't it reaching for the sky?" I found myself laughing, the corners of my mouth lifting as I began to see the world through her lens. As we walked, we discovered a hidden mural in a narrow alleyway, obscured by years of neglect. It burst with color and life, telling stories silent to most passersby. "Let's document it," Mia exclaimed, pulling out her phone to capture our find. Suddenly, the average coffee run morphed into an unexpected art expedition full of wonder. That day, I realized how a simple change in perspective could prompt a flurry of insights. I hadn't just taken a walk, I had mini-adventured through my city. The question I began to ask myself was, how many murals had I missed? How many stories unheard, simply because I hadn't been looking closely enough? Mia's knack for curiosity opened my eyes not just to the city, but to the potential wonder in my day-to-day life. We went on to explore parks, coffee shops, even the grocery store aisles, transforming our errands into a tapestry of delightful experiences. How curious it is that something as small as a coffee run can lead to profound realizations. Those moments became critical for nurturing the analytical skills I often deemed essential. In today's world, where rapid decision-making is often lauded, honing curiosity allows us to ask questions that deepen understanding. It became apparent that wonder isn't just a revelation, it's an analytical tool that fuels creativity and fosters growth. But our adventures took an unexpected turn one crisp Saturday morning. We decided to venture to a park I'd never been to before, intrigued by the promise of a hidden duck pond we read about. As we strolled, however, an uneasy feeling crept into my chest. I noticed Mia, her eyes darting to the edges of the trail, an excitement building as she motioned for me to look. "There! Do you see it?" she whispered, her hand pointing at a rustling bush. My heart raced, caught between the thrill of her enthusiasm and an inexplicable apprehension. As we drew closer, the rustling ceased, a breath held perhaps, and then a soft coo. It emerged from the bush, not a sweet little bird, but a small, trembling creature, a lost kitten, its wide eyes glistening with fear. In that moment, I realized our exploration wasn't just about the wonders outside, it mirrored the wonders within. We had set out that day to find beauty in our environment, but we discovered the unexpected beauty of compassion and care. With each step, I learned we could cultivate wonder not just in great discoveries, but also in small acts of kindness. Every day, every coffee run or park stroll was a chance to uncover layers of joy, curiosity, and connection, even when it took a sharp, unexpected turn. Chapter 2: Building a Foundation. Understanding critical thinking. Throughout my academic journey, I often found myself entangled in the complex web of information that surrounded me. It was during a lively discussion in Dr. Lewis's class that I first began to grasp the concept of critical thinking. I remember sitting in my usual spot, the sunlight streaming through the window, illuminating the pages of my worn-out notebook. Dr. Lewis, with his unassuming demeanor, posed a question that seemed deceptively simple. What does it mean to think critically? In that moment, sparks of curiosity ignited within me, urging me to delve deeper into this expansive realm. Critical thinking, I learned, is more than just a buzzword tossed around in educational settings. It's the art of analyzing, interpreting, and evaluating information, skills that transcend subjects and impact every facet of life. Drawing inspiration from my discussions with Dr. Lewis and the enlightening texts I consumed, I began to break down critical thinking into approachable components. At its core, I discovered the importance of observation. We must first learn to pay attention to the world around us. The nuanced details, the subtle shifts in context, these are the building blocks for all that follows. As I progressed, I recognized that analysis required questioning. Why does this information matter? How does it fit within a larger narrative? I recalled a particularly heated debate in class where we discussed social media's influence on public opinion. Each statement made was ripe for scrutiny, and in those exchanges, my colleagues and I honed our ability to dissect arguments with precision. Yet, the most profound revelation came when I realized that true critical thinking demands a willingness to engage with differing perspectives. It's a dance of collaboration, not a solitary endeavor. Through these experiences, I started crafting a framework for critical thinking in my mind, recognizing that it wasn't merely about dissecting ideas, but also synthesizing new ones. A practical example emerged in my own life when I faced a significant decision regarding my career path. Armed with the tools I'd acquired, I mapped out the potential outcomes of each choice, weighing evidence, considering biases, and truly reflecting on my values and aspirations. The clarity I achieved through this process was illuminating. It transformed a daunting crossroad into a strategic plan of action. Yet there remained an unsettling truth lurking beneath the surface. Just as I felt empowered by my newfound skills, I began to encounter complex scenarios where even the most diligent analytical approaches faced limitations. There were instances, especially when discussing contentious issues, where emotions clouded reason. In those moments, I found myself overwhelmed, grappling with the pressure to convince and persuade, often forgetting the very essence of critical thinking. It requires patience and humility. It was a humbling realization that no matter how adept I felt, the pursuit of understanding is ongoing, and the path can sometimes feel perilous. As I reflected on this evolution, I came to understand that critical thinking is a journey, not a destination. It involves engaging deeply with oneself and others, continually asking questions, and evolving alongside new experiences. And while I could articulate its significance, I also recognize that it's the practice that truly honors our abilities. I found myself craving more opportunities to engage with divergent viewpoints, to strengthen my framework, and to foster a deeper understanding not only of the world around me but within me. In this pursuit, I sensed the dawning of a new chapter, one where the importance of critical thinking reached far beyond academics and bled into the very fabric of daily life. The tension built as I prepared to encounter increasingly complex dilemmas, knowing that every question could lead to either clarity or chaos, each moment a chance to wield my critical thinking skills wisely. Key components of analytical skills. Analytical skills have often been described as a kind of mental toolbox, filled with the tools that help us decode the complexities of the world around us. I remember the day I first realized this when I sat down to study for my finals. All textbooks sprawled out like a chaotic map for an uncharted territory. Yes, the sheer volume of information felt overwhelming, but it became clear that my greatest challenge was not the content itself, but the ability to navigate it. That's when I encountered the first key component of analytical skills: observation. Observation is more than just looking at something. It's about truly seeing it. During my studies, I learned to take notes that weren't just regurgitations of what I read, but were insights, connections, and questions that arose as I engaged with the material. This active engagement was pivotal for grasping difficult concepts and retaining information. Next came interpretation, the bridge that transformed raw data into meaningful information. As I worked through the layers of arguments in my papers, I often found myself interpreting complex theories. There was a moment in writing a particularly grueling research paper when I had to dissect conflicting viewpoints on climate change. This involved not only identifying the core arguments, but also discerning the underlying assumptions and biases from the authors. By interpreting these nuances, my analysis became richer and more nuanced, reflecting a deeper understanding of the topic. It was like putting together a puzzle where a single misinterpretation could distort the entire picture. However, neither observation nor interpretation would suffice alone. Analysis takes us further. It's the process of breaking down information into manageable parts to understand the whole. I vividly recall a study group session where we tackled a dense piece on economic theories. We took the time to analyze various models, sketching them out on whiteboards and discussing their implications. The discussion flowed naturally, with each member contributing a different facet of understanding, which ultimately enriched our collective insight. It was a complex interplay of ideas that allowed us to extract essential meanings from the dense text, fulfilling the analytical process. Evaluation, the next component, demands a critical eye that assesses the validity and significance of information. When I finally submitted that research paper, I knew I had to rigorously evaluate every source I cited. It was not just enough to throw in quotes that sounded fancy. Each piece of evidence had to withstand scrutiny. I learned to ask myself questions. Is this argument sound? Does the author have credibility? Is there any hidden agenda? This evaluative process became integral to my academic integrity, shaping not just how I wrote, but how I approached information in life. The stakes felt high. I knew I was shaping my argument and reputation. Finally, there's reasoning, the capstone of analytical skills that connects all the dots, guiding us toward logical conclusions. The summer I interned at a local nonprofit, I had to utilize reasoning repeatedly while developing programs for community outreach. After surveying the community's needs, I had to extrapolate that data into actionable programs. What resonated? What would effectively address our goals? It wasn't just about having data. It was about connecting it back to the mission of the organization. Through reasoning, I could see how every piece of information I gathered informed our strategy. It felt like an intricate web of interconnected thoughts and ideas, reaffirming how powerful analytical thinking can be. In weaving these components together, observation, interpretation, analysis, evaluation, and reasoning, I found that analytical thought wasn't just practical in academic settings, but in my day-to-day decisions as well. A surprising encounter happened when I had to mediate a dispute between friends. I applied those same analytical skills by observing the emotions at play, interpreting their words, analyzing the situation from multiple perspectives, evaluating the credibility of each claim, and reasoning through a resolution. The outcome wasn't just a solution, it became an insightful lesson on human dynamics. Analytical skills, although rooted in structured thought processes, breathe life into our interactions and decisions. They sharpen our understanding, illuminating the way forward through the complexities we face. On that fateful day of my final exams, as I took a deep breath and opened the paper, I felt this undercurrent of excitement. Each question was an opportunity, a puzzle to solve with the arsenal of skills I had honed through experience. But as I scanned the questions, one caught my eye. It was unlike anything I had studied before, demanding not only knowledge, but the very essence of analytical thinking I had built. Tension surged through me. Could I connect the dots? Could I rise to the challenge? In that moment, the culmination of all I had learned became not just a test of knowledge, but a test of my analytical mettle, and I felt that familiar mix of fear and exhilaration wash over me. The importance of a growth mindset. As I sat on the edge of the gym's wrestling mat, staring at my reflection in the wall-mounted mirror, I couldn't help but feel a pang of frustration. My mind was racing, trapped in a loop of negative thoughts. I had just experienced another setback, a grueling match where I had completely misjudged my opponent. I could almost hear the whispers of my inner critic. "You'll never be good enough. Just give up." But just as I began to wallow in that familiar pit of despair, I caught sight of Sam, my trainer, striding toward me with his ever-encouraging demeanor, and I knew a shift was about to happen. Sam had a way of talking that made vulnerability feel like strength. In the past few months of training together, he had introduced me to the concept of a growth mindset, a fundamental shift from the fixed notions I had held about talent and ability. It was as if he had handed me a key to unlock my potential, a reminder that failures weren't the end of the road. They were merely stepping stones. With each tough training session, he urged me to embrace the challenges, see them for what they were, and recognize that discomfort often heralded growth. "Every setback is just a setup for a comeback," he would assure us, his eyes sparkling with conviction. Reflecting on my past, it was astonishing to realize how many opportunities I had missed simply because I had been afraid to try. In my early school years, I had mistakenly believed that writing talent was an innate gift, something you either had or you didn't. So I scoffed at the idea of entering a writing competition, content to sit back and admire others from afar. But now, with Sam's lessons echoing in my mind, I began to rewrite that narrative. I ventured into workshops and started penning my own stories, not concerned with perfection, but with the joy of expressing myself and improving over time. And just like that, the chains of a fixed mindset began to falter, giving way to resilience that I didn't know I possessed. But let's not sugarcoat this journey. Adopting a growth mindset wasn't smooth sailing. There were days when the weight of my unrealized expectations pressed down hard, like the heavy barbell I struggled to lift in the gym. There were moments when my failures felt too grand, too public, and I longed for the comfort of hiding away instead of standing up and trying again. Yet what I learned from those experiences was priceless. It was all about reframing my approach to failure. Instead of seeing it as a stopping point, I began to view it as a lesson waiting to be uncovered. When I fell short, I asked myself, what can I learn from this? How can I do better next time? One particularly challenging day, after losing a match that I thought I had prepared perfectly for, I confronted Sam in the locker room, disappointment dripping from my words. I thought I was ready. I thought I could win, I lamented. Sam listened patiently, then leaned in. You want to win, right? But winning comes from learning and growing through the difficult moments too. What did this match teach you? His question hung in the air, forcing me to reflect. Instead of retreating into self-pity, I slowly started discerning the lessons of the match, the techniques I could improve, the strategies I had overlooked. By the end of that conversation, I realized that he was right. My resilience was my greatest tool against adversity. As my journey continued, the transformation rippled through my life outside of the gym. I began to approach social situations with the same vigor I had adopted in wrestling. Instead of fearing rejection when speaking to someone new, I relished the chance to make connections, embracing each conversation as a platform for growth. And the most liberating part? I felt empowered to ask questions, challenge ideas, and engage critically with others. It was a thrill, a rush of creativity and understanding that I desperately craved. And yet there I was, back on that mat, facing a major wrestling tournament, my biggest challenge yet. The stakes were high, and I could feel the familiar nerves bubbling up. Would my new growth mindset be enough? What if I failed again? But as I took a deep breath, I reminded myself of everything I had learned, that failure was not a full stop, but a comma, a necessary pause in the narrative of success. The true test wasn't just in winning, it lay in how I approached the inevitable challenges ahead. I could feel the hope surging within me, propelling me forward. As the referee called us to the beginning position, I glanced around at my fellow competitors. They were just like me, each with their own fears and aspirations, each battling their inner critics. I realized that we all stood at a crossroads. We could either shrink back in fear or leap forward into our potential. And in that moment, as the whistle blew, I chose to leap. Chapter 3, The Art of Observation, Seeing What Others Don't. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when I first met Lila, the artist who would unravel realities I hadn't known existed. The cafe we chose for our meeting was adorned with art, colors splashing across the walls in a chaotic tapestry of creativity. Looking around, I felt like a mere observer, sometimes struggling to decipher the fluid strokes and abstract forms. Yet, there sat Lila, a small sketchbook perched on her knee, her eyes glimmering with an understanding far deeper than what met the eye. I was immediately intrigued, and it marked the beginning of a journey that would stretch my perceptions to their limits. Our conversations flowed like the coffee we sipped, rich and layered, each word dripping with nuance. Lila had this way of observing the world that made the ordinary shimmer against the backdrop of a larger narrative. I remember her telling me about her painting process, how every blank canvas held multitudes of stories waiting to be coaxed out of the ether. Most people see a wall, she said, her gaze flicking to an immense blank surface near us. I see a realm of possibilities where colors and emotions could collide in a dance. Those words stayed with me, prompting me to rethink how I viewed not just art, but life itself. As our discussions deepened, I began to notice how Lila dissected each scenario we explored, peeling back layers to reveal interpretations hidden beneath the surface. when she recounted tales of her travels, each anecdote brimmed with perspectives I hadn't considered. We could talk for hours about the same event, each of us unearthing fresh insights. What's important, she emphasized, is not just what happened, but how it's perceived and transformed inside each person. This concept, seeing beyond the apparent, was a transformative idea that ignited something within me. It was a key to unlocking an arsenal of analytical prowess I never knew I had. One afternoon, the conversation shifted to a personal experience I had shared months prior. I had described a tense moment between a close friend and me, where I felt misunderstood. Lila leaned back, her brow furrowed in thought. What if your friend wasn't the only one needing to reevaluate? She asked softly. What if you also looked at your own position in that moment? What dimensions of your feelings could you uncover? The simple inquiry sent a ripple through my mind. I hadn't considered my role in our misunderstanding, how my own feelings could be intertwined with the situation we faced. It was then I truly grasped the depth of her perspective, to analyze not just a scene, but the interplay of emotions, backgrounds, and personal narratives that come into play. As I began to adopt Lila's unique way of analyzing, I found myself in a series of situations where this newfound perspective had remarkable clarity. I tackled workplace conflicts with finesse, approaching disagreements with care and illuminating the other person's viewpoints, while still advocating for my truth. Lila had given me a prism through which to dissect circumstances. Yet even as I grew, a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I felt like I was adopting a new set of lenses. What would happen when the view changed too dramatically? Would Lila's vision be too expansive for the confines of my own understanding? The tension reached a peak one evening under the soft glow of hanging lights at the cafe where we first met. Lila had just finished a poignant series of sketches that brought to life the contrast between joy and sorrow. Art captures the essence of life, she explained, brushing her fingers over the blended pigments. You'll realize that the shadows make the colors brighter. But as we discussed the intricacies of her work, I found myself wrestling with an uneasy thought. What if, despite all these revelations, I still only scratched the surface? The fear of remaining stuck loomed over me, a specter of doubt whispering that I might forever remain oblivious to the richness of perspectives surrounding me. But in that moment of uncertainty, I remembered Lila's unwavering belief in the importance of embracing discomfort as a pathway to growth. Taking a deep breath, I steadied myself. I realized that the essence of seeing what others don't isn't merely understanding countless perspectives. It's about being okay with not knowing everything and trusting the ongoing exploration of life's complexities. As our conversation ebbed and flowed, I made a silent promise to myself to never stop questioning, never stop seeking depth, and most importantly, to never stop learning from the myriad interpretations that make our shared existence so wondrously intricate. The role of empathy in analysis. There's a unique power in empathy, a force that can transform mere interactions into profound connections. As I traversed various landscapes during my travels, I found myself engaging with people from myriad backgrounds, each with their own story. One such encounter was with Raj, a local craftsman in a quaint village in India. I wandered into his shop, drawn in by the vibrant colors of handmade textiles. We struck up a conversation that lasted for hours, a tapestry of his life woven into the simple questions I posed. Raj shared his childhood memories of growing up in the village, the laughter of children echoing through the fields, and the dreams he once had of becoming a teacher. But as I listened, I couldn't help but sense the currents of sadness that underpinned his words. He spoke of his family, of struggles he had faced, and of the sacrifices made to keep the tradition of his craft alive. It was a masterclass in how emotional experiences shape our narratives, a duality that often gets lost in pure analysis. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, I realized that my analytical skills were being refined right then and there. Raj's story urged me to consider the broader context of his experiences. Each thread he wove into his craft carried not just color and texture, but the weight of history, emotion, and survival. Through that lens, I shifted from merely understanding statistical data about economic struggles to grasping the living, breathing reality behind those numbers. It was a wake-up call, urging me to integrate empathy into all facets of analysis. I returned to my travels, transformed. I began to seek out stories, relishing every chance to connect with those around me. Each encounter moved beyond the superficial, peeling back layers to reveal the rich emotional tapestries that underlie the more rational discussions we often engage in. I started to see analysis not just as a logical exercise, but as an exploration of hearts and dreams. However, this approach wasn't without its challenges. Engaging deeply with emotional narratives forced me to confront my own biases and perceptions. I found myself in uncomfortable situations, grappling with conflicting viewpoints and the emotional hardships that came with them. It challenged my analytical mindset, pushing me to question my preconceived notions. But instead of fearing this discomfort, I learned to embrace it, recognizing that within the tension lies the potential for deeper understanding. It was perhaps one night in a bustling marketplace where this tension came to a head. I was engaged in a heated debate with a group of travelers about the merits and demerits of globalization. Voices rose and tempers flared as opinions clashed. But as the discussion progressed, I found myself switching perspectives, trying to fathom the emotional undertones each person carried. Suddenly, the room quieted, several people looking deep in thought. I had suggested we listen rather than argue, to share our own stories and the fears behind our opinions. As each person opened up, I noticed shadows lifting. Conversations turned from conflict to understanding, as we realized we were all more similar than we cared to admit. In that moment, I understood the true role of empathy in analysis. It can transform a fractious exchange into a collective quest for truth, drawing forth insights that purely rational discourse might overlook. However, I also discerned that empathy could lead to vulnerability. By allowing myself to perceive the world through the eyes of others, I was creating connections at the cost of my own emotional shield. The weight of their stories burdened me. I felt their pain and joy as if it were my own. Was it worth it? Absolutely. The richness added to my analytical perspective eclipsed the discomfort that came with it. As I reflect on these experiences, I encourage you, dear reader, to weave empathy into the fabric of your own analyses. Approach every interaction with curiosity and a willingness to listen. Each story you encounter, much like Raj's, is a stepping stone towards a broader understanding of our shared human experience. When we allow empathy to influence our analysis, we don't just become better analysts, we become better human beings. Practicing mindfulness in daily life. Mindfulness for me began as a curious exploration rather than a practiced discipline. My yoga instructor, Tara, first introduced me to the idea during one of our sessions where she emphasized the importance of being present. Mindfulness is not just a practice, it's a way of life, she said, her voice soothing. I couldn't help but wonder how something as simple as paying attention could hold such power. It wasn't until I started weaving this philosophy into my daily routine that I saw transformation begin to take shape in my thoughts, behaviors, and all the chaotic noise that typically filled my mind. I committed to a ritual. Each morning, before the demands of the day encroached upon me, I devoted 10 minutes to meditation. Just 10 minutes. I'd settle into a comfortable position, the scent of sandalwood incense drifting through the air, while calming instrumental music played softly in the background. My mind often waged a war of distractions, running to the lists of tasks awaiting me, to conversations I had yesterday and those I dreaded tomorrow. But slowly, through persistent practice, I learned to acknowledge these thoughts without judgment, gently guiding myself back to the breath, the here and now. This practice grounded me, creating a mental space that felt almost sacred. Journaling became my companion in this journey. Each evening, I'd reflect on my day, documenting thoughts that flitted through my mind like butterflies. It wasn't about crafting prose, it was about honesty. I'd write about moments that rattled me, instances of doubt, joy, or frustration. Tara had taught me this was critical to clearing mental clutter, allowing for clarity that fostered a greater capacity for critical thinking. As I put pen to paper, I realized how aptly mindfulness served as a lens, sharpening my focus and enabling me to analyze situations with newfound perspective. My thoughts became more coherent, and the issues I once found insurmountable now appeared less daunting. But, as life is often unkindly unpredictable, a test was coming, one that I couldn't anticipate. A project at work, my biggest yet, loomed over me like an ominous cloud, each deadline creating a pressure that began to seep into the tranquility I cultivated through mindfulness. I recalled Tara's words, "Mindfulness isn't just for calm moments, it's a tool you carry with you." I leaned deeper into my routine, mindful of the cascade of emotions battling within me. Anxiety, excitement, and fear all wrestled fiercely in my chest. The presence I fought so hard to maintain was crumbling under the weight of expectations and self-imposed urgency. Yet within that chaos, I grasped an invaluable truth. The more I sought clarity, the more critical thinking punctuated my responses rather than knee-jerk reactions. I learned to pause, to breathe deeply before proceeding with decisions rather than skim over the worries that clouded my judgment. But the pressure kept building as deadlines approached, and in a moment of weakness, I found myself overwhelmed, recalling how Tara often spoke of the power of acknowledging our feelings without judgment. As the project reached its climax, a mere day away from submission, I noticed an unsettling tension in my stomach. I mustered all my strength, wanting to succumb to the whirlpool of anxiety engulfing me. Yet I reached for my journal, pouring my feelings on the pages, letting the ink serve as an outlet for my fears. It was at that moment I realized, mindfulness isn't just a practice for tranquility. It's a toolkit that allows us to navigate life's storms. What I have learned thus far is merely foundational. What lay ahead demanded me to use these tools in tandem as I approached the final stretch of that daunting project. Chapter 4: Questioning Assumptions, Identifying Bias, a Personal Experience. It was during the bustling chaos of our final project for an advanced marketing class that I stumbled upon a reality I hadn't quite acknowledged before, the subtle yet insidious nature of bias. Our group, comprising myself, Anna, and Brian, was tasked with formulating a comprehensive marketing strategy for a local startup. Excitement buzzed in the air as we laid out our initial ideas, all fueled by our personal experiences and perceptions. But as the discussion unfolded, I noticed an unsettling trend. My interpretations were skewed, shaped not by objective facts, but by my preconceived notions of what the client wanted. As we transitioned from brainstorming to decision-making, I found myself pushing for tactics that, in hindsight, were more about my comfort zone than the project's needs. I argued passionately for social media engagement based on my familiarity with platforms I personally enjoyed. Meanwhile, Anna, with her wealth of experience in traditional advertising, suggested a more grassroots approach that I would dismiss with an eye roll, convinced I knew better. Brian, caught in the crossfire, squirmed in his seat, reluctant to voice his own ideas amid our clashing perspectives. It wasn't until the tension in the room reached an apex, an almost electric discomfort, that I realized my biases were not only influencing my decisions, but also stifling my teammates' contributions. Later, as we gathered after the presentation to analyze our performance, Anna's words rang in my ears. I felt overshadowed, like my ideas didn't matter. Brian nodded in agreement, and a wave of guilt crashed over me. This was a pivotal lesson, not just about teamwork, but about self-reflection and the acknowledgement of biases. Understanding bias isn't merely a theoretical exercise. It's a necessary tool for sharpening our analytical skills and fostering an environment of collaboration. I realized this was a golden opportunity to reassess not only our strategies, but also my approach to leadership and teamwork. I learned that recognizing one's own biases can lead to more informed, objective conclusions, avoiding the pitfalls of unilateral thinking. This moment sparked a desire within me to dig deeper and uncover how biases impact our lives, because if they could distort my understanding, they could very well do the same to anyone. Thus, I set out on a journey of reflection, armed with new awareness, ready to engage with my colleagues in a more meaningful and inclusive way. Challenging the status quo. Family gatherings have always been a cacophony of laughter, stories, and as I discovered that evening, deeply entrenched beliefs. The aroma of my mother's famous lasagna wafted through the air, mingling with the sounds of my relatives catching up after months apart. Yet, amidst the pleasant chaos, a storm brewed just under the surface, one that I hadn't anticipated. As we settled into our seats, the conversation shifted toward a topic that felt particularly charged: education. My brother, David, had always been my ally in intellectual skirmishes. He leaned over to me, his voice barely a whisper over the animated discussions around us. "Why don't you share your thoughts on that? You have a different perspective," he said, nudging me slightly. I hesitated. The conventional views expressed around the table ran deep, influenced by generations of tradition. My family valued the stability of the tried and tested, something that had always made me feel like an outsider when my ideas diverged. But the encouragement from David ignited a spark within me. Taking a deep breath, I offered my thoughts, carefully threading my words. "I believe that we need to rethink our approaches to education," I proposed. The momentary silence that followed felt heavy, like a taut string ready to snap. I pointed out how our current system often prioritizes memorization over critical thinking, stifling creativity and innovation. With each argument I presented, I felt both exhilaration and trepidation. How would they respond? Would I be met with resistance or curiosity? David's supportive smile gave me courage, pushing me deeper into the fray. To my surprise, my aunt, who was usually the first to advocate for traditional beliefs, raised an eyebrow and entered the conversation. "But the way things have always been is what makes us who we are," she countered, her voice rising. Others chimed in, echoing her sentiments with fervor. It became clear that I had stirred a pot that many deemed best left undisturbed. Yet, I remained committed to my stance, emphasizing that evolution is the bedrock of progress. As I spoke, I noticed the tension building. My family's eyes darted around the table, some in disbelief, others intrigued. Part of me wanted to retreat, to stay safely within the parameters of conformity, but David's steady gaze urged me on. It wasn't about winning an argument. It was about fostering an environment where questions could lead to growth. As I leaned into the discussion, I encouraged them to reflect on how challenging norms could actually enrich our collective understanding. Just as learning from diverse experiences and viewpoints strengthens critical thinking. The room crackled with dissent and curiosity, and before long, a lively debate had emerged, bubbling over with passionate arguments on both sides. But just as I felt the energy of the conversation turning optimistic, my uncle, with his deep-set beliefs, launched into a tirade that felt more personal than I anticipated. "You think you know better than tradition? That's going to lead to chaos," he spat, his voice rising above the clamor. The enthusiasm in the room suddenly shifted into something darker, a palpable tension thickening the air. The faces around me froze. Some looked as if they were bracing for the aftermath of a clash, while others seemed surprised that I would dare speak so boldly. In that moment, I remembered that challenging the status quo was not merely about disagreeing. It was about opening a door to deeper conversations. "It's not about knowing better," I replied, my voice steady, but rather about understanding that growth stems from questioning, even the traditions we hold dear. Silence enveloped us momentarily, the weight of my words hovering precariously in the air. I could sense the curiosity and hesitance melding, a precarious balance I hoped would lead to meaningful dialogue instead of division. This moment of tension illuminated the essence of our discussion, an opportunity not just to disagree, but to learn. I caught David's eye across the table, and in that silent exchange, I felt an unspoken agreement. It was necessary to challenge the established norms for the sake of progress, however uncomfortable it may be. As the evening progressed, the fires of debate somewhat simmered, but they left behind glowing embers of thought. Change is never comfortable, and challenging the status quo comes with its share of discomfort. Yet, I realized that such moments, anchored in respect and curiosity, could ultimately strengthen our critical thinking capabilities, not just as individuals, but as a family, forging a richer tapestry of understanding among us. In the end, that gathering became a cherished memory of growth and connection, reminding me that confronting deep-seated beliefs is where true progress begins. Techniques to dig deeper. When I first stepped into Nina's workshop, I didn't quite grasp the depths of the analytical skills I was about to uncover. It felt like entering a well-structured maze, each turn promising discovery. The atmosphere buzzed with curiosity and a slight tension, the kind you feel when standing on the brink of understanding something profoundly important. One of the first techniques Nina introduced was the beloved 5 whys. I can still remember grappling with it like a weightlifter facing a new set of weights. The idea was simple, yet profound. For any issue or challenge, ask why 5 times until you reach the core of the problem. It became a game for me, a challenge to peel back the layers of a situation. I found myself testing it on everything from my morning routine to workplace frustrations. As I progressed, I realized the 5 whys wasn't just a technique. It was a lens through which I could view problems differently. One day, I was at a crossroads at work, frustrated over a repetitive miscommunication in my team. Tired of losing precious time, I sat down and asked, "Why does this keep happening?" After the first few rounds, it became clear that our meetings lacked clarity on individual roles. Each why opened a new pathway of thought that ultimately transformed an annoyance into a strategic opportunity for improvement. Suddenly, people were talking about accountability, not as a burden, but as a key to freeing up our creativity and efficiency. It was exhilarating. The warmth of resolution spilled over into the team's dynamics, igniting sparks of cooperation. But that wasn't the end. With every victory came the realization that deeper inquiry often leads to more complex challenges. One evening, feeling bold, I decided to apply the same technique to my personal life. There had been a recurring argument with my partner that I had swept under the rug, believing it too trivial to confront. I took a leap and asked myself, why does this bother us so much? By the 5th why, I uncovered layers of insecurity and unspoken fears that had crept into our discussions like uninvited guests. This exploration wasn't merely uncomfortable. It felt like chiseling away at a rock to reveal the delicate statue within. Beautiful, but forever changed by the process. My heart raced as I realized how crucial open dialogue could be in dissipating those fears. Yet confronting those truths required bravery, not just of me, but of both of us. The tension in the air tightened as emotions threatened to spill. How would we navigate through the emotional labyrinth I had unearthed? Chapter 5. Gathering evidence from anecdotes to data. The sun was setting behind the community center, casting long shadows across the playground where we had spent our weekends volunteering. Tom and I had initially joined the project to lend a hand with the local youth program, but as the months rolled by, we stumbled upon stories that would change our perspective on service and data forever. I had always loved storytelling. There was something magical about weaving experiences into a narrative. But my journey with Tom revealed how these anecdotes could evolve into something more powerful when paired with hard facts. As we interacted with the kids, their laughter mingling with our conversations, we began to notice patterns, how certain kids thrived on the playground while others remained withdrawn. In one particularly poignant moment, a boy named Jaden shared with us how he felt invisible at school. That story resonated with me, pulling at strings of empathy I didn't even know existed. How could we translate Jaden's experience into a framework that could help us understand the larger issue of social exclusion in our community? That's when the idea struck me. What if we paired our qualitative experiences with quantitative research? We could gather stories like Jaden's and supplement them with data points, attendance records, participation rates, and surveys measuring the children's well-being. As we started to sketch out our findings, I could see how each narrative breathed life into a stark number. It was no longer just a statistic. It was a voice, a heartbeat behind the data. Tom was skeptical at first. He was grounded in the empirical, the measurable. Isn't that diluting the data? He challenged one afternoon over coffee. I shook my head, my belief only strengthening. No, it's enriching it. Remember that story about Jaden? What if we collected more stories like his and analyzed them alongside the metrics we gather? It could highlight trends in a way that numbers alone can't. Reluctantly, he agreed to try, and that moment marked the beginning of countless late nights spent poring over anecdotes and stats. With each story we documented, the pieces started to fit together. I found captivating trends that suggested a wider issue, how children from different backgrounds engaged with our program differently. Their stories, when juxtaposed with the data we collected, painted a vivid picture that mere figures could not convey. We found ourselves presenting our findings to the community, weaving anecdotes into our reports, letting Jaden's story serve as the emotional core. The audience leaned in, tested the loneliness embedded in his words, and I could see their faces respond to the statistics now filled with meaning. But not everyone was on board with our approach. During one particularly tense meeting, a local council member stood up and opposed our methodology. "Statistics are facts," he bellowed. "You can't just cloud them with feelings." My heart raced as I prepared my response, aware that the newly kindled purpose we had found could flicker away in an instant. "But are we not telling the story of our community?" I replied, feeling a surge of determination. "These kids are more than just numbers. Their experiences are essential to understanding the impact of our efforts." The tension in the room was palpable, and for a moment I feared our project would fall victim to the scrutiny of double standards in data interpretation. I took a breath, scanning the faces of Tom and our friends, people who had sensed the same urgency and fervor as I had in sharing these narratives. We're not dismissing the numbers. Rather, we're giving them a voice. We want our community members to connect with these data points intimately. We believe that stories can ignite passion and change. As silence enveloped the room, I could feel the weight of the moment. This was our crossroads. In that charged space, a few nods of understanding began to ripple through the crowd. I saw Tom's expression shift from concern to cautious agreement, and my heart swelled with hope. We had begun with the aim of helping children in our community. And now, we were standing on the edge of a much larger conversation, one that could challenge conventions and inspire change. The importance of reliable sources. The first time I stepped into the dusty realm of research, I felt like an imposter. I was just a student, fumbling through the vast library of knowledge under the watchful gaze of Mrs. Collins, our indefatigable librarian. With her wire-rimmed glasses perched precariously on her nose and a permanent marker in hand, she had this uncanny ability to make a stack of encyclopedias appear as inviting as a stack of freshly baked cookies. But her lesson on the importance of reliable sources was more than just academic banter. It was the kindling for a fire that would burn throughout my life. On one chilly Tuesday afternoon, the crisp air sparking a surge of creativity, Mrs. Collins guided me through the labyrinthine shelves of our library. She pointed to a book titled Fact or Fiction: Navigating Information in the Digital Age. With a knowing smile, she whispered the words that have reverberated through every intellectual conversation since. "You can find information anywhere," she said, "but it's crucial to discern who's telling the story." In an age where a few clicks could yield a swarm of articles, memes, and videos, her words served as a lighthouse in a foggy sea of noise. This lesson became particularly vivid during one of our book club discussions, a lively group I had joined out of sheer curiosity. We were diving into a compelling novel filled with historical references. One member passionately claimed a historical figure had been unjustly vilified over the centuries. The room buzzed with agreement, and I saw the flicker of conviction in their eyes. But something nagged at my conscience, an urge to dig deeper. I recalled Mrs. Collins' words about sourcing information. I quickly pulled out my phone and scoured trusted databases and news archives, determined to unveil the truth. As I combed through the findings, my heart raced. I uncovered documents and scholarly articles that painted a far more nuanced picture, debunking the sweeping assertions made earlier. The moment I shared my findings, it was as if a gust of wind had swept through the room. Faces turned from enthusiastic agreement to thoughtful contemplation. A stark realization set in. We had been led astray by hearsay, caught up in the allure of a captivating narrative without validating the facts. All those exhilarating discussions had relied on a shaky foundation. But instead of a heavy silence following my revelation, a dialogue blossomed. The importance of credible data became our collective focus. What started as a simple book club meeting transformed into an analytical session on the value of facts versus fiction. Reflecting on that evening, I realized that fostering a nuanced understanding is paramount in both literature and life. It's easy to get swept up in popular opinion, especially when it's wrapped in a compelling story. Yet the drive to verify and question becomes a powerful tool for personal growth and societal change. As I sit here now, contemplating the myriad discussions I've had since then, the lesson remains at the forefront of my mind. Reliable sources are the bedrock of any analytical process. It's not just enough to have opinions. We owe it to ourselves to ground our beliefs in facts. Looking back, I am grateful to Mrs. Collins for instilling this vital skill. It is not merely about asking the right questions, but knowing how to seek answers responsibly. In our increasingly interconnected world, the path to sound judgment lies in embracing the essence of research with diligence and discernment. In every conversation, every analytical debate, I find myself armed not just with knowledge, but with the understanding that truth is not merely a matter of perspective. It demands rigorous pursuit. And in that pursuit, I hope to inspire others to engage in the same transformative journey. Sifting through information overload. There was a time in my life when the internet felt like a relentless tide, a constant surge of information crashing against me, threatening to engulf my thoughts and drown my creativity. Every notification, every email, every glowing screen pulled me into a whirlpool of articles, podcasts, and videos demanding my attention. I remember aimlessly scrolling through my phone late at night, feeling a strange mix of urgency and impotence, as if I were trying to catch raindrops in a sieve. It was overwhelming, and I felt like I was losing control of my own mind. Then came Lisa, my organizational coach, like a lighthouse guiding me through the fog. I recall our first session vividly. She asked me to list out the sources of information that contributed to my chaos. As I scribbled down the endless names of websites, social media platforms, and beloved yet neglected podcasts, a sense of clarity emerged. Lisa introduced the concept of digital clutter, all those little bits of information we accumulate that don't serve a purpose. It struck a chord with me. My brain was cluttered, just like my desktop, with files I didn't need and articles I never read. Recognizing this was the first step in a long journey toward regaining my focus. With Lisa's guidance, I began crafting a system, an intricate web designed purely for organization. I learned to create designated folders for each interest, color code them, and even establish a hierarchy with subcategories. Writing down my goals transformed my approach. Instead of seeking random snippets of information, I started asking targeted questions. What do I need to learn about effective communication? How can I streamline my creative process? This simple switch framed my search for knowledge and helped me sift through the noise. One of my favorite strategies became the weekly review. Every Sunday, I would dedicate some time to assess my digital space. I'd sift through bookmarked articles and unsubscribe from the newsletters that no longer served me. I'd breathe a sigh of relief as I watched the number of unread emails dwindle, like clutter being swept away. It was liberating. Clearing out the excess allowed me more room to think. I found that when I managed my digital presence actively, my capacity to analyze and synthesize information increased dramatically. I no longer felt like I was drowning, but rather navigating the currents with intention. But then my mantra was put to the test. One evening, while preparing for an important presentation, I was drowning again. This time, it wasn't from general chaos. This was a tidal wave of research material, insights, and data I deemed critical. My organizing habits seemed to have failed me as I frantically searched through disorganized notes and hastily bookmarked URLs. Amid my growing anxiety, whispers of doubt crept in. What if I couldn't pull this off? The clock was ticking, and the pressure was palpable. In that moment, I had to rely on the very tools Lisa had instilled in me, but would they be enough? Chapter 6. Synthesizing Information, Connecting Dots, My Personal Story. The first time I realized the power of connecting dots was during my summer internship at a nonprofit organization focused on environmental conservation. I was assigned to research community engagement tactics, but it felt like a vague task, disconnected from reality. However, as I immersed myself in the project, I began to uncover the intricate threads linking environmental issues to community well-being. My childhood memories of planting trees with my grandfather sprang to mind, and suddenly, it all made sense. This wasn't just research, it was a chance to intertwine my personal story with meaningful action. A few months later, I volunteered at a local food bank. Initially, I thought it was just another way to give back, but the experience transformed my perspective once again. Sorting through cans of food, I noticed one brand was consistently out of stock. It prompted me to ask, why? After chatting with fellow volunteers, I realized it wasn't simply a supply issue. It was a matter of preference and perception. Some products were overlooked due to branding, despite being nutritious. This insight changed my approach to food donations and advocacy. I learned that understanding people's preferences was key in addressing broader societal issues. By reflecting on seemingly unconnected experiences, my internship and volunteer work, I grasped the importance of empathy in analysis. As I connected these dots, I felt more prepared for the challenges that lay ahead. However, the real test came when I decided to pitch a community initiative for the following summer. I envisioned a project combining my environmental awareness and newfound understanding of community needs. But as I crafted the proposal, seeds of doubt crept in. Would people care? Would they see the value in what I had to say? Suddenly, these small, connected experiences felt overwhelming, like pieces circling around a central idea, but not quite coming together. It was humbling and terrifying to realize that every story, every interaction had led to this moment, and now the stakes felt significantly higher. Would I be able to leverage these insights into actionable change, or would they dissolve back into the ether of good intentions? The pressure mounted, and I was left to confront the question of whether my journey had truly prepared me for this leap. Creating a framework for ideas. When Alex and I first started brainstorming together, it was like opening a floodgate of ideas. They gushed forth, sometimes overwhelming us. While the sheer volume was thrilling, it often left us swimming in uncertainty about how to sculpt those ideas into something meaningful. That's when we realized we needed a framework to evaluate and categorize our thoughts, a guide of sorts to help us sift through the creative chaos and find those nuggets of gold. We began by identifying a few core categories that could help us sort and analyze our thoughts: feasibility, originality, relevance, and impact. This simple structure, akin to crafting a playful yet strategic game board, allowed us to navigate the multitude of ideas swirling around us. I remember sitting at the coffee shop one rainy afternoon with scraps of paper strewn around and a nearly empty cup of coffee, as we developed a chart that would become our guiding compass. The process felt both freeing and grounding. We had rules, but there was still plenty of room for exploration. During our sessions, Alex would often provide another layer of clarity by asking probing questions about each idea. How does this align with our overall vision? What resources would we need to bring this to life? Who else might be impacted by our decision? These questions became the scaffolding for our conversations, allowing us to make more thoughtful decisions. Instead of feeling disjointed and distracted, we were able to dive deeper, understanding potential weaknesses or challenges before they became roadblocks. This systematic approach not only improved our communication, but also honed our ability to critique each other's ideas constructively. We created a safe space where both praise and constructive criticism could flourish, enabling us to bring out the best in one another. I remember one particularly intense session where an idea I was passionate about fell flat under scrutiny. Instead of feeling defeated, however, I embraced the critique, realizing it could be reworked into something stronger and more impactful. The tension of that moment transformed into fuel for greater creativity. As we progressed, the clarity brought about by our framework began to change the dynamics of our ideation process. We could stand back and evaluate why certain ideas resonated while others didn't, shaping our perception as we matured in our creative endeavors. Yet, as our sessions grew more refined, one pressing question lingered. Could we truly create something that not only fulfilled our criteria, but also sparked genuine joy and fulfillment in ourselves and others? The pressure was mounting, and we both felt it. A silent but palpable tension began to creep into our monthly meetings. On one particular evening, as the sun sank behind the city skyline, Bathing our workspace in a warm golden glow, we laid out our ideas on the table. But under the surface of that friendly, creative exchange rested an undercurrent of urgency. We both knew that time was ticking, and our aspirations were beginning to clash against the harsh realities of deadlines and expectations. Suddenly, Alex's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. What if we're thinking too small? What if we used our framework to challenge the very boundaries we've set for ourselves? Silence settled as I absorbed the weight of his words. It was an invitation to leap into the unknown, to embrace the discomfort of audacity. My heart raced as I contemplated what it could mean. Could we expand our framework even further, and in doing so, allow ourselves to explore completely uncharted territories? The tension in the air crackled with possibility, sparking a sense of urgency in our creative journey that we had yet to tap into fully. Together, we stood on the precipice of something revolutionary, ready to leap beyond the confines of our established framework and into a world of untamed ideas. The value of diverse perspectives. It was during my study abroad program that I realized the profound impact of diverse perspectives. Stepping off the plane in Tokyo, I was greeted not just by the vibrant city lights and the smell of street food, but by a universe of ideas, customs, and viewpoints that differed wildly from my own. There, among a group of international students, I found Ahmed, with his passion for philosophy, and Yuki, whose artistic interpretations of culture opened my eyes. We came from different backgrounds, yet found common ground in our curiosity. It was in the gentle banter of late-night conversations that I discovered how our varied experiences could enrich our understanding of the world. Ahmed often challenged my views on ethics, pushing me to examine moral dilemmas through the lens of his Middle Eastern upbringing. He spoke about the weight of tradition in his community and how it shaped his understanding of right and wrong. Yuki, with her sharp wit, would weave stories about Japanese culture, contrasting it against Western ideals of individuality. I learned to appreciate nuanced discussions. They didn't just challenge my preconceived notions, but invited me into a new realm of understanding. Our conversations dissected complex societal issues such as immigration, global warming, and identity politics, ultimately guiding me toward critical thinking. As the weeks passed, the tension in our discussions grew, particularly around the topic of cultural appropriation. Ahmed felt it was essential to respect the roots of a culture before borrowing from it, while Yuki argued for the positive exchanges that could stem from cultural blending. I found myself caught in the crossfire, realizing the stakes of these conversations extended beyond mere opinion. They reflected lived experiences and histories. It was through these debates that I recognized the power of diverse perspectives. Each voice resonated with a unique truth, revealing layers to issues I once thought I understood. By holding space for disagreement and challenging each other respectfully, we deepened our comprehension of the world, and more importantly, of each other. The experience culminated in a group presentation on the intersections of culture and society, where our debates transformed into a synthesis of ideas. As we prepared, the level of tension rose. I worried if we could convey the complexity of our discussions effectively. Would our audience appreciate the intricate web of perspectives, or would they prefer singular narratives that painted the world in black and white? In the days leading up to the presentation, we wrestled with these dilemmas, striving for clarity amid diversity. The lively exchanges became more than preparation. They were reflective of the journey toward understanding in itself. I realized that resolving the tension meant honoring each perspective, while also finding a theme that resonated. The day finally arrived, and as we stood in front of an audience buzzing with anticipation, I felt the weight of those conversations pressing down on us. The blend of cultures and perspectives we brought to the stage was not just a display of diversity. It was a testament to our growth as thinkers. I glanced at Ahmed and Yuki, feeling a surge of pride as we began to speak. The dialogues we nurtured had transformed into something compelling, something that could inspire others to appreciate the value of diverse perspectives in grappling with the complexities of our society. The tension that brewed in our discussions had forged a richer narrative, one that demanded to be heard. As I spoke, I could see the audience's engagement shifting, their spark of curiosity igniting in the very tension we had once felt worried about. Chapter 7: Evaluating Arguments, Recognizing Logical Fallacies. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, and I found myself in the familiar confines of my college debating hall, surrounded by eager faces and spirited voices. The air was thick with a mix of brash confidence and palpable tension as we prepared for what would be a pivotal debate on the ethics of artificial intelligence. I had been armed with the knowledge from Dr. Reed's persuasive writing class, where we unraveled the threads of argumentation like detectives on a thrilling case. From ad hominem to straw man, we donned our hats and magnifying glasses to locate and expose logical fallacies lurking in everyday discourse. On that day, our topic was rich with complexity, ideal for a display of both rational thought and emotional appeals. As I listened to my opponent passionately present their argument against AI, I felt the adrenaline surge within me. Yet, instead of jumping to refute his points, I disengaged for a moment to recall Dr. Reed's teachings. Listen critically, avoid getting swept away by the rhetoric, focus on the structure of their argument. This mantra echoed in my mind as I tuned into the nuances of his delivery, determined to identify any possible fallacies. Suddenly, gold struck. My opponent asserted that because technology is often misused, we should refrain from its development altogether, an example of a slippery slope fallacy. Instead of letting my excitement get the better of me, I crafted my rebuttal, articulating not only why this argument held no merit, but also how critical it is to separate the potential misuse from innovation. The room felt electric as I laid out my points, my confidence boosted by the clarity of my thoughts. As the debate soared to its climax, the exchange grew more heated. Emotions charged the air as we volleyed arguments back and forth, and it happened. A moment when my opponent, in a flurry of passion, resorted to an ad hominem attack, dismissing my credibility instead of addressing my points. The room fell silent, a collective intake of breath as I recognized an opportunity. The warmth I felt from the knowledge I'd gained sparked within me. My logical fallacies checklist had mentally prepared me for this moment, and I could feel the heat of the crowd's anticipation. I took a deep breath, channeling Dr. Reed's voice in my head. Always return to the argument, never get personal. I navigated through the crowd's murmurings, reminding everyone that discourse thrives on a foundation of respect and rationality, not personal attacks. The exhilaration of dismantling his approach was intoxicating, a rush that set the stage for what felt like a minor victory, not just for me, but for critical thinking itself. By the end of the debate, not only had I honed my analytical skills, but I had also set an example of how recognizing logical fallacies sharpens discussions. As I left the hall, exhilarated yet thoughtful, I understood that every debate is not only a chance to voice my views, but an opportunity for growth, for myself and those around me. In that moment, I knew that the real victory lay not in winning or losing, but in empowering others to think critically, fostering a culture where we learn to value clarity over cleverness, listening skills, more than hearing. It all started on a seemingly ordinary Saturday morning when I found myself in a sunlit conference room surrounded by a mix of eager faces and skeptical expressions. The air buzzed with the murmur of chatter, but I tuned out the noise, focusing on the small stage at the front where Sophia, a renowned communication expert, was about to open my eyes to the world of active listening. I had signed up for the workshop out of curiosity, not knowing it would be a turning point in both my professional and personal life. Sophia began by challenging our preconceived notions of listening. Listening is not just about hearing words, she stated firmly, her voice cutting through the room's chatter like a knife. She then flooded us with anecdotes, one of which struck a chord with me. She shared how her son had once come home from school, buzzing with excitement about a science project. Instead of merely nodding along, she decided to truly engage. By asking open-ended questions and reflecting back what he said, she unearthed layers of thought and passion he hadn't even realized he was expressing. In that moment, I remembered a similar instance with my own niece, where I had failed to listen, brushing aside her tales as mere child's play. I felt a pang of regret, which ignited a fire within me to embrace this new approach. As the workshop progressed, Sophia introduced us to practical exercises designed to hone our listening skills. We partnered up to practice reflecting what we had heard, and the results were astonishing. I learned that active listening involved not just understanding the words spoken, but also picking up on tone, emotion, and body language. When it was my turn to listen, I focused intently on my partner, demonstrating nonverbal cues like nodding and maintaining eye contact, all while resisting the urge to interrupt. After sharing her story, she remarked on how refreshing it felt to discuss it without the fear of being dismissed. It hit me. By truly listening, I wasn't just doing her a service. I was opening up a world of connection and understanding. Throughout the day, I began to recognize the profound impacts these skills had on my analytical abilities. My usual approach to discussions usually left me skimming the surface, eager to provide my own insights before fully grasping others' perspectives. But by actively listening during the workshop, I started absorbing intricate details, extracting meanings I'd previously overlooked. The shift was palpable. When engaged in discussions afterward, I found myself weaving insights from others seamlessly into my contributions, which sparked richer, more meaningful dialogues. As we neared the conclusion of the workshop, Sophia challenged us with a final exercise that truly tested our newly acquired skills. We were paired up once again, this time to engage in a heated debate, an exercise designed to pressure our listening capabilities amidst the clamor of differing opinions. My partner, a passionate advocate for environmental issues, spoke with a conviction that echoed in my chest, but with each point he raised, I felt a familiar urge to counter, to defend my own views. Then, catching a glimpse of Sophia's encouraging smile, I paused, inhaled deeply, and redirected my instincts. Instead of responding immediately, I focused on understanding his arguments fully. In those final moments, as my partner's voice surged with emotion, something within me shifted. I realized that listening, in its truest form, demands not just patience but courage. The courage to embrace discomfort and uncertainty. As the workshop wrapped up and the applause died down, a newfound resolve settled over me. My journey into the depths of active listening had only just begun, and I now understood that it was not just a skill to be polished, but a path toward empathy, connection, and growth. Yet as I prepared to leave, a nagging thought brushed against my consciousness. Could I maintain this momentum in the chaotic world outside these walls? Only time would tell, and that uncertainty ignited a spark of tension within me. Pragmatic approaches to disagreements. It was during my junior year in college that I found myself entangled in a group project that felt more like a wrestling match than a collaborative effort. The task seemed simple enough on paper, yet as soon as we convened, it became clear that our different perspectives and personalities clashed in a way that was both comical and frustrating. I remember sitting in the corner of our cramped study room, reflecting on how quickly our enthusiasm began to unravel into bickering. It was during one of these squabbles that I realized we needed a pragmatic approach to navigate our disagreements. At the time, I wasn't particularly experienced in conflict resolution, but I had a gut feeling that patience and open-mindedness could be our saving graces. I suggested we all take a step back and share our viewpoints one by one without interruption. What unfolded was unexpected. Instead of a volley of rebuttals, I witnessed something transformative. As each person spoke, I could see the gears turning in my teammates' heads. They began to understand each other's perspectives. This method didn't just calm the tempers, it created room for critical thinking. Listening became just as potent as speaking. Encouraged by this small success, I further proposed we pivot our focus towards shared goals. By redirecting our conversations from where we differed to where we aligned, we started to identify our common ground. Every individual had unique ideas, and while we could easily pick apart each suggestion, we also had the capacity to blend them into something entirely new if we chose to work together. Critical thinking became a collective effort. Everyone weighed in, and rather than being driven by pride, creativity began to flourish where skepticism once held sway. Yet, just as we found our rhythm, a new conflict brewed on the horizon. One afternoon, with deadlines looming and tensions simmering, two of my teammates found themselves in an all-out argument over the project's direction. It escalated quickly, and I watched with a mix of dread and fascination. Here was the perfect storm, contrasting visions, hurt feelings, and a looming pressure that threatened to tear our team apart. I could feel my heart racing as I realized that everything we'd built could crumble in an instant. But rather than succumb to panic, I forced myself to breathe, reflecting on our earlier breakthroughs. I interrupted their back and forth with an urgent yet calm voice, reminding them of our shared objectives. Let's take a moment. What are we actually trying to achieve here? I could see their expressions soften, as if my question momentarily halted the cognitive dissonance swirling around us. It was a reminder that beyond our disagreements, there existed a task waiting for resolution. This time, however, I leaned heavily into encouraging critical thinking. I asked them to articulate not just their stance, but the reasoning behind it, to share the data, the context, and the implications. The tension began to thaw. Instead of arguing over whose idea was better, we delved into a more constructive dialogue about the merits and drawbacks of each proposal. It was a slow process, but like thawing ice, our differences began to yield to understanding. By the end of that session, we emerged not just with a solution for our project, but also with a newfound respect for one another's perspectives. The habit of approaching disagreements through patience and critical thinking had profoundly changed how we collaborated. But that experience reminded me that while we had navigated one storm, many more would arise, beckoning a repertoire of pragmatic tools for conflict resolution. As deadlines loomed and pressures mounted in future projects, I felt the scars of prior disagreements guiding my approach. I drew on those lessons, fostering environments where open discussion was not just tolerated, but encouraged. Each time we faced dissent, I could sense the lingering tension, but the strategies, patience, understanding, and prioritizing our shared goals reminded me that there is always room for growth and learning in conflict. And in a world brimming with disagreements, our ability to transform them into tangible outcomes became not just a skill, but an art worth mastering. Chapter 8, The Role of Creativity, Thinking Outside the Box, Real-Life Examples. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when my phone buzzed with a message from Max, my friend and serial entrepreneur. He had just wrapped up a significant deal for his latest startup, and as usual, I found myself captivated by his unconventional approach to business. Max was the kind of guy whose creativity seeped into every pore of his professional life. I had seen him transform a coffee shop into a community hub by hosting weekly game nights, and I had watched him pivot from a tech-savvy app development team to a sustainable clothing line almost overnight. His knack for thinking outside the box had not only kept him afloat, but thriving in a sea of mediocrity. "Meet me at the cafe," his message read. "I've got something big to share." Eagerly, I donned my raincoat and headed out, intrigued by what my friend had conceived this time. I arrived, the comforting smell of coffee warming the air and drowning out the cold rain drumming against the windows. Max was already there, a bright spark in his eye, the telltale sign of his latest eureka moment buzzing around his head. Over a mug of steaming espresso, he shared his latest endeavor, a subscription box service for entrepreneurs that provided not only resources, but curated experiences and networking opportunities. "People don't just need tools, they need community," he said, leaning forward, enthusiasm spilling over. "It's all about creating a network of like-minded individuals who can inspire one another. What if we broke the mold of dull online courses and offered immersive experiences instead?" As he spoke, my mind raced, overwhelmed by the potential of his idea and how it stood in stark contrast to conventional approaches. Unlike so many startups focusing solely on the digital age, Max was pivoting back to the basics, emphasizing human connection wrapped in a digital format. It was brave and risky, but that was Max, always willing to take the leap when others hesitated. The conversation turned to the inevitable challenges. "Everyone tells me I'm crazy," he admitted. "They say people won't coalesce around a brand like this. But isn't that the secret? We're not selling a product, we're selling a movement." I could sense the tension building in him, the familiar feeling of being misunderstood and misaligned with traditional paths. It struck a chord deep in me. I, too, had often felt the weight of expectations, the never-ending cycle of conforming to societal norms of success. Max's story wasn't just about business. It was about the freedom to be different, about taking the initiative to defy conventional thinking, and above all, about personal growth. It reminded me of a lesson I had learned long ago, which was to embrace the messiness of creative thought. Just as Max was ready to overhaul the entire concept of what an entrepreneurial resource platform should look like, I realized that change always starts with someone daring to disrupt the norm. As we finished our coffee and Max laid out his plans, I watched the rain taper off, revealing a vibrant rainbow in the distance. "Promise me you'll tune into your own instincts," he said, grinning. "The world needs your voice too." That struck me like a bolt of lightning. Suddenly, I felt the urge to reflect not just on Max's inspiring journey, but on my own uncharted paths and ideas that were bubbling beneath the surface. I knew I wasn't alone in this, as I gathered stories from others who had dared to step off the beaten path. In the days that followed, I looked around at the world, noticing exceptional individuals who also stepped beyond the lines of traditional thinking. There was the local farmer solely focused on permaculture techniques in the midst of conventional monoculture practices, demonstrating the power of sustainability. A vision for regenerative agriculture emerged from their efforts, and soon their yields were outperforming others. Their radical approach was yielding not just crops, but a movement toward food security. Another story lured me in, a teacher who defied the rigidity of the curriculum by integrating creative arts into every lesson, transforming lethargic classrooms into vibrant ecosystems of learning. They created a space where students felt safe to explore their talents and imaginations, turning the traditional model upside down. Each student became a stakeholder in their learning journey, a model that district heads soon sought to replicate. As I pondered these remarkable narratives, I recognized a shared thread, the commonality of resilience in the face of criticism and doubt. This chapter of my life was unfolding with the promise of something new. It compelled me to dig deep and explore how creativity could manifest in both simple and grand ways. Just as I began to feel the urgency to act upon my own dreams, I overheard a small group laughing nearby, discussing Max's subscription box idea, marveling at its potential. The warmth spread through me as I realized it was more than just a conversation. It was a sign, a reminder that change is a collective effort. As I left the cafe, feeling invigorated by the stories of Max and others leading the charge against conventionalism, I knew it was time for me too, to let go of any remnants of self-doubt. It was time to think outside the box, embrace my creative instincts, and contribute to this ongoing dialogue. Who knew what could unfold when we dared to defy limitations? Bridge between logic and imagination. When I think back to my childhood, a flood of memories rushes in, most distinctly those art classes with Miss Clark. I remember the paint-splattered floors and the smell of turpentine mingling with fresh canvas. Each week, we'd busily sketch, mix colors, and let our imaginations run wild. Yet Miss Clark would often remind us that every stroke of the brush must have purpose. At the intersection of vivid colors and logical shapes, she cultivated a space where creativity thrived and structure was revered. One sunny afternoon, she handed us a peculiar challenge: create a painting that represented both the chaos of emotions and the order of mathematics. At first, I balked. Chaos was enticing. Math felt like a set of chains I could never escape. Yet, as I stared at the blank canvas before me, I felt an urge to blend the two worlds. I remembered how in math, every problem had a solution, a logic behind it, much like every chaotic painterly swath held a hidden narrative waiting to be unraveled. Miss Clark's words echoed in my mind, urging me to see possibilities beyond mere walls of logic. Inspired, I began layering bright swirls of color that represented swirling emotions, but I superimposed a grid of fine black lines across it, reminiscent of a graph paper layout. Looking back, this act may have seemed merely an artistic choice, but it was a revelation. Each stroke was informed by a mathematical structure, yet dripped with uncontained whimsy. It sparked an understanding within me. Blending imagination with logic isn't just a method of creating art. It's a powerful tool for innovative thinking. Years later, standing at the edge of a bustling corporate world, I often find myself grappling with this same challenge. In meetings that are filled with numbers and statistics, buried beneath the surface of strategic plans and performance forecasts, I continuously ask myself, how can I intersperse creativity into this logical maze? Recently, amidst discussing quarterly goals, I started to share a concept similar to my childhood painting. I proposed visualizing our annual targets, not just as hard numbers, but as a canvas where each goal could represent a rejuvenating splash of color, fostering collaboration and innovation. As I spoke, I noticed furrowed brows transforming into intrigued nods. The tension in the room lightened, opening pathways for more ideas to bloom, suggesting that when we allow our imagination to dance within the realm of logic, we can chart paths that lead to unprecedented solutions. Yet there also existed a palpable unease. What if they deemed my ideas too abstract? Could my fanciful approach threaten my perceived professionalism? It was a delicate balance, and I felt a moment of doubt, one I had known well since those art classes. Standing on the precipice of fear and potential, I remembered Miss Clark's lessons. Innovation isn't just born from logic or imagination alone. It's the merging of both that breathes life into ideas. This chapter of my life, blending artistic flair with analytical rigor, became my bridge between what was known and what could be. A reminder that to be genuinely innovative, we may need to color outside the lines. Thus, with my heart thumping and my resolve steeled, I shared my idea in its entirety. As I described a future where our goals were not just metrics, but vibrant whipped cream on a cake that needed to be savored, something remarkable happened. The tension boiled to a pinnacle moment, morphing into laughter and conversations as others chimed in with their imaginative visions. This unlikeliest of meetings transformed into a collaborative spell, uniting the vast landscapes of our minds and weaving a rich tapestry of possibilities that lay beyond mere numbers. Techniques to foster creative thinking. Attending the workshop led by artist Ella was like stepping into a vibrant world of possibility. I remember walking into the studio, the air thick with the scent of paint and the sound of laughter, feeling a mixture of excitement and trepidation. I had always considered myself somewhat analytical, often defaulting to logical conclusions. But that day, I hoped to unravel the tightly wound threads of my creativity and explore ideas beyond the conventional boundaries I've put up over the years. Our journey began with mind mapping, a technique that Ella presented with such enthusiasm it was contagious. I had heard of mind mapping before, but seeing it in action reignited my curiosity. We each took a large sheet of paper and began to scrawl our central idea, our artistic pursuit, at the center. Suddenly, the world narrowed down to that one point. Yet, as I started branching out with thoughts and tangents, the paper exploded into a chaotic web of connections. I could sense something bubbling within me. It felt liberating to allow my mind to drift without the reins of strict logic holding it back. That initial exercise set the tone for the rest of the workshop. Brainstorming followed, a more structured yet equally freeing method. Ella encouraged us to voice every idea, however outlandish, emphasizing that the rule was to build on what others proposed. As I listened to my peers throw out their thoughts, I realized how fresh perspectives could transform a simple idea into something beautiful. Each time we shared, I found myself reevaluating my own entries, pulling inspiration from their daring concepts. It was a potent reminder of how collaboration can ignite creativity, lighting a path I would have never envisioned alone. As the workshop progressed, I began layering these techniques into my everyday analytical practice. I would wake in the early hours, armed with my notebook, eager to mind map my daily tasks or brainstorm potential outcomes for my projects. I felt a surge of energy coursing through my veins, propelling me toward ventures I had previously deemed too risky or too unconventional. Yet, just when I thought I had fully harnessed these techniques, there it was, a moment that would challenge everything I thought I knew about my creative capabilities. It was during the final session of the workshop when Ella introduced a technique she called the Big Idea Challenge. Each of us had to present a wild, impractical, yet exhilarating idea. When it was my turn, I hesitated, my thoughts racing. But I remembered Ella's words, "Don't censor your imagination." And so I let it all spill out, an audacious plan that intertwined art, technology, and community. The room buzzed with energy, but as I spoke, I sensed an unexpected tension in the air. A few skeptical eyes narrowed as if they were measuring the feasibility of what I proposed. I found myself standing on a precipice, fearing the ridicule of my peers, yet exhilarated by the daringness of my idea. This moment felt pivotal. I grappled with doubt and the desire to innovate, the very essence of creative thinking at its finest. Would my peers embrace my vision or twist it into something unrecognizable? The stakes felt monumental, and just as I was about to falter, a voice broke through the charged silence. Chapter 9: Applying Critical Thinking in Real-Life Dilemmas and Decision-Making. It's a strange feeling, sitting at the crossroads of your life, with choices sprawling out before you like an obscure map stripped of landmarks. I remember a particularly stormy evening when I found myself grappling with one such dilemma. It was the kind of night that made the heart heavy, the kind where even the mundane aspects of life, like deciding between two job offers, felt monumental. The phone sat silently on my desk, a lifeline to a future I couldn't quite grasp. One of the offers promised stability, but little growth. The other was a leap into the unknown, thrilling yet terrifying. I knew I had to make a choice, but how? How was I to navigate the emotional fog that clouded the decision-making process? Reflecting on this experience, I came to realize that the essence of decision-making lies in the interplay between emotion and rationality. I sat down with my family later that week, turning the dilemma into fuel for discussion. My father, a man of sharp logic, leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed in thought. "Critical thinking," he said, "is about breaking down the problem and considering all angles before arriving at a conclusion." We spoke at length about decision-making frameworks, like the pros and cons list, which my mother lovingly dubbed the T-chart of life. Despite its simplicity, this framework unlocked something for me. It illuminated the pathways I hadn't noticed before, balancing emotional impulses with logical reasoning. As I navigated the layers of my dilemma, I realized I was not alone in my struggles. We've all faced similar quandaries. A close friend once found herself torn between pursuing a passion that filled her soul and a more conventional career path that promised financial security. Her frustration mirrored my own, and through our conversations, I began to understand that emotions, while powerful, could cloud judgment. This led me to the idea of creating a decision matrix, where gut feelings were anchored by clear evaluations of risk and reward. However, the toughest part of this framework was anchoring myself against the tidal wave of fear. Fear of regret, fear of failure, fear of making the wrong choice. The stakes grew higher as the days turned into weeks, and I felt the weight of my decision pressing down on me. My mind churned through possibilities at night while sleep eluded me. Emotions surged, excitement for opportunity, dread of the leap. But what I truly sought was clarity. It wasn't just about making a choice. It was about understanding what the choice meant for me in the broader tapestry of my life. Guided by my father's wisdom and my mother's supportive words, I began to cement my thoughts. I closed my eyes and envisioned each path branching out into the future. The idea of living a life unexamined terrified me more than making a wrong decision. Eventually, after weeks of internal wrestling, I sat across the table from my parents, revealing my final decision. As I spoke, the tension in the room was palpable. Would they support me, or would they urge me to take the safer route? The air was thick with anticipation, and as I articulated my choice, I recognized that beyond the fear and excitement lay the understanding that ultimately, whatever decision I made, it would lead me somewhere. And in that moment, grappling with my feelings and armed with the analytical tools I'd gathered, I chose to embrace uncertainty. I selected the path that felt right in my heart. This experience not only taught me about decision-making, it became a poignant reminder of how critical thinking, when balanced with emotional awareness, shapes our destinies. As I move forward, I carry those lessons with me, informing each choice with clarity and compassion, knowing that each decision is a step toward crafting a life filled with authenticity. I hope to inspire readers to navigate their own dilemmas with courage and thoughtfulness, using critical thinking to illuminate even the darkest paths ahead. Case studies. Learning from experience. The first time I truly understood the power of case studies was in my second year of college. I remember sitting in class, the sunlight streaming through the windows, illuminating the faces of my peers as we huddled around our desks. Our professor, Dr. Morris, had a knack for turning dry theory into a living, breathing narrative. He introduced us to a small tech startup that had skyrocketed to success and then, just as easily, plummeted into bankruptcy. It was a tale woven with ambition, mistakes, and invaluable lessons. I could feel my analytical gears grinding, and for the first time, I was not just absorbing information. I was processing it, questioning it, and imagining how different choices could have led to a different ending. Diving deeper into this case study, I found myself pulling apart the decisions made by the founders. What went wrong? They had a brilliant idea, but their marketing strategy was flawed. They misjudged their target audience, focusing on features rather than the benefits that would have engaged consumers. I laughed, thinking of my own tendency to do the same in my projects. The lesson hit home. Learning from the mistakes of others could spare me from dangerous pitfalls. It wasn't just about what they did right. It was also about what they did wrong and how I could proactively avoid similar traps in my own journey. Another pivotal moment came during a case study on a famous retailer that had once dominated the market but faded into obscurity. The analysis unfolded like a detective story. My classmates and I played the roles of analysts, piecing together clues from the past 2 decades: overexpansion, an outdated business model, and a failure to adapt to digital commerce. It made me uneasy. I began to see the signs of stagnation in other domains, both in business and within my own life. This is what case studies provide: foresight and clarity. They pushed me to ask, what critical decisions am I making today that might compromise my future? As I reflected on these experiences, something clicked within me. The analytical skills I was developing transcended the classroom. I began to notice nuances in everyday situations, from observing how a local cafe managed customer service or how my friend's startup handled social media. Each scenario provided an opportunity to apply what I had learned. The case study method wasn't just for school, it was a lifelong tool. At that moment, I realized the value of drawing insights from diverse experiences, both personal and professional. However, it wasn't until I faced my own critical moment that the lesson crystallized. I had just launched a project I was passionate about, but mistakes cropped up almost immediately. I scrambled to fix issues, feeling overwhelmed and somewhat defeated. But then I remembered my case studies, how once flourishing businesses had faced challenges far worse than my own. I took a step back, analyzed what was happening, and adjusted my strategy. I reached out for feedback, not from friends who would sugarcoat the truth, but from trusted mentors who'd navigate the rocky seas of entrepreneurship themselves. The feedback was brutal but necessary, and I felt the tension rising. Yet in that discomfort, I found clarity. The experience of struggling through this initiation reminded me that success is not just measured in outcomes, but in resilience and adaptability. By embracing the learnings from case studies, I was able to reframe my approach, learning not just from my mistakes, but from the collective wisdom of others. As I stepped away from my desk, I felt a surge of determination. If they could rise after falling, why couldn't I? The world was my case study, and I was more than willing to analyze, adapt, and overcome, adapting skills to different contexts. It was during my first semester in graduate school that I realized how vital my analytical skills were going to be, not just in the sterile bubble of research, but in the larger, more chaotic world outside the classroom. Walking into my first seminar, I felt like a deer in headlights. Everyone seemed to carry an air of confidence, equipped with their own arsenal of knowledge and experience. I thought back to my undergraduate years when I had streamlined my analytical skills to ace exams and papers. Yet here, I realized the same skills needed a coat of polish, a transformation to fit a different context. The first real test came unexpectedly during a networking event organized by the university. I remember standing nervously at the back of the room, clutching a lukewarm cup of coffee, as seasoned professionals mingled effortlessly. I knew the standard script: introduce myself, express genuine interest, ask questions. But I decided to take a different route. Instead of solely relying on my analytical skills to dissect their experiences, I iterated on them. I engaged in a dialogue where I proportioned my knowledge and curiosity equally, transforming the interviews into mutual explorations of ideas. Something remarkable happened. Connections were made that day, deeper ones than I had anticipated. I started realizing that adaptation wasn't just about context, it was about connection. In the academic setting, I could rely on strategizing multivariable analyses or deciphering complicated research articles. But at networking events, the key was translating those skills into conversations that sparked interest, ignited curiosity, and built rapport. I became a storyteller, threading my analytical mindset through personal anecdotes, framing data within real-world scenarios. By simplifying complex concepts into relatable narratives, I moved from the role of a mere participant to one of an engaging collaborator. Yet as I put this adaptability into practice, challenges popped up like unexpected plot twists. I found myself in a crucial interview for an internship. My analytical skills had gotten my foot in the door, but the interviewers were looking for more than just intelligence. They tested my ability to analyze in real time through scenarios that demanded quick, instinctive responses. The pressure mounted as they presented a dilemma involving budget overruns and team dynamics. I felt the pressure. My usual methodical approach seemed to stall in the rush of assessment. But instinctively, I remembered my experiences at networking events. I pivoted, synthesizing my knowledge and instincts on the spot, framing my response around teamwork and prioritization instead of draining details. As the conversation flowed, I felt a rush of adrenaline. I realized the emotional aspect of analysis, how crafting responses required not just heads-down thinking, but also the ability to read the room. I knew then that critical thinking couldn't exist in a vacuum. It had to flow, adapt, and resonate with the people involved. I walked away from that interview energized, knowing that while analytical skills form the backbone of effective problem-solving, the real magic lies in the relationships we foster through communication. However, as I ventured deeper into this world, I came to a crossroads. Another networking event approached, but this time I felt a wave of dread. Had I genuinely adapted, or was I just putting on a show? The last thing I wanted was to appear disingenuous. As the date loomed larger, I found myself questioning whether I had the strength to meet that self-imposed standard of authenticity while maintaining my analytical edge. Could I unravel the layers of conversation without losing the essence of my analytical self? Would those pieces translate into genuine connections or fall flat, leaving me vulnerable? Chapter 10: The Ethics of Thought, Responsibility, and Expression. There's an irony to the nature of communication that I've often pondered. We as human beings are gifted with the ability to articulate thoughts and feelings. Yet sometimes we can miscommunicate even the simplest ideas. I remember a time during a heated debate among friends that left a lasting impression on me. It was an ordinary evening, filled with laughter and casual banter, until someone introduced a controversial topic. As opinions began to clash, the environment shifted. Words that were meant to inspire discussion instead built walls between us. This painful experience taught me an invaluable lesson. Clarity and respect are paramount when sharing ideas. Reflecting on that incident, I realize how easily miscommunication can arise from the specifics of our expressions. Each word carries weight, and our tone can alter the message entirely. In trying to defend my viewpoint, I found myself resorting to sarcasm and sweeping statements that I didn't actually believe. In the moment, it felt like I was gaining ground, but in truth, I had sown distrust among my peers. Responsibility doesn't just lie in the act of expressing ourselves, it also demands an understanding of the implications of our words. If we prioritize clear communication, abandoning the impulse for clever retorts, we invite a culture of open dialogue, one where everyone feels safe to share their perspectives. Research supports this perspective. Studies show that environments fostering respectful conversations promote not only individual growth, but also collective understanding. People are more engaged when they believe their ideas can be shared without judgment or ridicule. As I delve deeper into the dynamics of anxiety versus clarity in discussions, I find that establishing a foundation of mutual respect often leads to more fruitful and analytical conversations. But here lies the crux. It requires courage to hold oneself accountable for one's expressions, particularly in situations where tensions run high. As I strive to embody this principle in my own conversations, I've learned a few techniques to ensure I communicate responsibly. First, I try to listen actively, pausing before I reply. This pause allows me to digest the other person's perspective fully, which helps me clarify my own thoughts. Second, I remind myself to frame my statements as invitations rather than confrontations. Instead of saying, "You're wrong about this," I look for ways to express curiosity, like, "I'd love to hear more about how you came to that conclusion." It's a subtle shift, but it can make all the difference in how my message is received. However, I won't pretend that this journey is devoid of challenges. There are still moments when my emotions surge, dragging me back into impulsive expressions. Recently, I found myself caught in an online discussion that spiraled out of control. Faced with a particularly aggressive comment, I felt the familiar urge to fire back. But instead of submitting to that urge, I chose to take a step back. I remembered my earlier lessons and took a deep breath. When I finally did respond, I focused on the problem rather than the person, fostering an environment where constructive dialogue could blossom. In that moment, I felt the tension recede and the conversation shift into something transformative, an opportunity to explore differing perspectives instead of merely defending my own. As I share these reflections, I find myself at a crossroads. The broader world around us seems as fractious as the debate among my friends that night. Yet within that turmoil, I see opportunities for connection and understanding. Responsibility and expression is not just an abstract concept. It is an imperative for fostering trust in our communities. The wisdom lies in remembering that behind every disagreement is a person, not simply a position. As I commit to this practice of mindful communication, I invite you to join me. Let's transform words from mere expressions of thought into tools for empathy, bridging divides instead of widening them, respecting diverse opinions. It all started over coffee, a fragrant blend of freshly ground beans that wafted through the cozy cafe where Rachel and I often met. We were comfortably ensconced in our usual corner, the aroma swirling around us as we dug into a debate that had been simmering for weeks, the impact of social media on society. Rachel, a steadfast advocate for the positive potential of these platforms, argued about their power to connect people and spread awareness about social issues. I, on the other hand, was more skeptical, raising concerns about misinformation and the superficial connections that often replaced real relationships. As our discussion heated up, I remembered a quote I'd read that morning: "The mind is like a parachute. It doesn't work if it isn't open." I took a deep breath, knowing that the key to this conversation would be respect, the ability to listen and genuinely consider Rachel's perspective, even when my own convictions felt so strong. So instead of launching into another counter-argument, I brought forth my questions. How do you reconcile the spread of false information that can mislead people? I asked, hoping to peel back the layers of her argument rather than dismiss it outright. Rachel paused, her blue eyes narrowing thoughtfully as she contemplated my question. Rather than feeling defensive, she took it as an invitation to clarify her stance. "I think of it this way," she said slowly. "Social media is a tool, and like any tool, it depends on how we use it." As the conversation flowed, I felt the tension of disagreement begin to transform into a richer discourse. We were no longer just two arguing sides. We had become a dialogue. This back and forth reminded me of the concept of epistemic humility, the understanding that our knowledge is limited and that someone else's insights could genuinely enhance our own. Each time Rachel presented her viewpoint, I pushed myself to respond not just with facts, but with empathy. "I see where you're coming from, but think about how easily people can get caught in echo chambers." Our exchanges were invigorating, propelling us into deeper layers of the topic. As our conversation developed, I began to realize how the act of engaging with Rachel's differing opinion was sharpening my analytical thinking. Instead of solidifying my own views, the dialogue was forcing me to examine the complexities of each side. The friction of differing opinions was creating sparks of insight, illuminating blind spots I didn't even know I had. But as the coffee cups emptied, I felt the unease creep back in. Rachel had brought up an impressive point about the role of social media in mobilizing communities for social justice. I could feel the remnants of my skepticism becoming harder to articulate. But can't those mobilizations sometimes be misguided? I threw out, feeling the weight of my challenge. Rachel looked at me, her expression a mix of determination and perplexity. "Of course, there are pitfalls," she replied, her tone steady. "But isn't it worth discussing how we can leverage those networks for positive change?" Her question hung in the air, sparking a wave of emotion within me. I wasn't ready to concede, but equally, I felt the tension of coming to a crossroads in our dialogue. This wasn't just about social media anymore. It was about the challenge of recognizing the validity of another's opinion, even when it gnawed at my own beliefs. As I contemplated my next words, the sense of urgency heightened. Would I choose to close off or continue to engage with an open mind? Our conversation, charged with a mix of respect and rivalry, reached a tipping point. I could either double down on my skepticism or embrace the possibility that maybe Rachel had a point worth considering. In that moment, a realization washed over me. This isn't just a debate, it's an opportunity. An opportunity to not only engage with differing opinions, but to learn from them. In honoring the conversation, I not only respected Rachel's position, but also paved the way for deeper understanding, a true reflection of what it means to engage constructively. Staying true to your values. It was a chilly morning in November when I found myself sitting in the conference room, the air thick with tension. My colleagues were discussing a new marketing strategy that promised overwhelming profits but came at a substantial moral cost. As the numbers flashed on the screen, gracefully dancing graphs and dazzling projections, I felt a sense of unease wash over me. It wasn't just about the money. It wasn't just about hitting targets. I realized the strategy would compromise our commitment to transparency, a value I held dear. I found myself torn between the corporate ambition that surrounded me and the principles I had cultivated throughout my career. This moment was far from an isolated incident. It was a manifestation of a continuous struggle I faced in my career. Every job had presented me with choices, and often those choices were steeped in gray areas. One time, an opportunity presented itself to work with a company whose practices I found ethically questionable. The offer was far too tempting to dismiss outright. The salary was impressive, and the prestige would elevate my career in immeasurable ways. Yet, every time I considered the effects of my potential decisions, I returned to the same guiding question: what do I stand for? In moments of doubt, I turned inward, reminding myself that my values were part of a foundation I had built over years. By refusing to compromise my core beliefs, I began to notice a shift not only in myself, but in my critical analysis of various situations. A compass born from integrity allowed me to dissect arguments more thoroughly, illuminating biases I once overlooked. I learned to ask the right questions that didn't just stem from strategic interests, but from a deeply rooted need for authenticity. When I took a stand during that November meeting, voicing my concerns about the strategy, the room fell silent. I felt a jolt of apprehension, but also a rush of clarity. Speaking up was not merely a matter of professional risk. It was an affirmation of my values, a plea for accountability. Little did I know, that moment would catalyze a broader dialogue within the company. As discussions continued and the atmosphere grew more charged, my heart raced with uncertainty. What if my words led to reprisals? What if I became isolated professionally? Still, I stood firm, prepared to face potential consequences. In hindsight, I realized that staying true to my principles opened up an unexpected avenue for collective reflection within the team. Over the course of that meeting, silence morphed into a dialogue, with others speaking up, echoing my concerns. It was a reminder that values resonate beyond the individual. They create ripples, catalyzing transformation that can surpass expectations. Ultimately, by embracing my values during that pivotal moment, I also empowered others to do the same. It revitalized our team dynamics, shifting our focus from short-term gains to sustainable practices that aligned with our ethical standards. That day marked a turning point for me, one where my principles and critical thought could coexist harmoniously. As I left that meeting, the crisp air felt less burdened. I exhaled deeply, realizing I had embraced a new level of personal integrity that would guide the choices I made moving forward. This experience taught me that when we align our critical analyses with our personal values, we not only enrich our decisions, but also open pathways for others to follow. Our values inform our perspectives, and when those values shine brightly, they illuminate the path to meaningful, impactful work. In a world often blurred by profit motives and ethical ambiguity, the strength of our convictions could just very well be our most powerful asset in making a difference, both for ourselves and for those around us. Chapter 11, Refining Your Skills. Continuous Learning Mindset. As I sit here sipping my coffee on a rainy afternoon, I can't help but reflect on the endless tapestry of experiences that have shaped my understanding of what it means to learn continuously. I remember my college days, standing at the precipice of adulthood, my mind racing with questions that felt too big, too daunting. Looking back, I realized that those very moments set the stage for my lifelong love affair with learning. It became clear to me that adopting a continuous learning mindset wasn't just about acquiring knowledge. It was about embracing curiosity, questioning the status quo, and transforming obstacles into stepping stones for personal growth. One of the pivotal figures in my life was my mentor, Professor Jameson. He had this profound ability to ignite passion in his students, artfully blending theory with real-world application. His classroom was a dynamic space where questions were encouraged and discussions sparked ideas that sometimes led us down unexpected paths. I remember vividly a day when the syllabus was tossed aside in favor of an impromptu debate on ethics in technology. That moment altered my perception of learning. It wasn't a linear journey with a clear endpoint, but rather an expansive horizon with infinite possibilities. Embracing a continuous learning mindset extends beyond formal education. Life itself is a series of lessons, each wrapped in experiences that demand our attention. I think of my volunteer work at a community center where I taught basic computer skills to seniors. Initially, I assumed I would be imparting knowledge, but each session revealed my lack of understanding. Their natural curiosity and unique perspectives pushed me to rethink my approaches, to adapt and grow alongside them. Every click of the mouse, every hesitant smile reminded me that learning occurs in the most unexpected places and can be powered by the very people you aim to help. It became increasingly evident that cultivating this mindset leads to enhanced critical thinking. I recall a moment when I was faced with a challenge at work, a complicated project that involved navigating conflicting opinions among stakeholders. Instead of aiming for a quick resolution, I paused and applied the principles I learned from my experiences and mentors. I asked open-ended questions, welcomed dissenting views, and created an environment where each voice was valued. The end result surpassed my expectations as we crafted a solution that was richer and more innovative than I could have anticipated. However, what struck me most was an event that brought the concept of continuous learning into sharp focus. During a workshop, the facilitator posed a simple question: what is one belief you hold that limits your potential? The moment hung heavy in the air, and as I sat contemplating my answer, a wave of realization washed over me. I had been limiting myself by thinking that my vocabulary was confined to academic language. It was in that moment I decided to challenge my own beliefs. I ventured into poetry, writing to explore emotions tied to the mundane, revealing depth I had never known existed within me. It was exhilarating, yet terrifying, realizing the obstacles I had constructed and how small actions stripped them away. Embracing a continuous learning mindset transforms vulnerability into strength. And it's this need for vulnerability that drives engagement and connection with others. Each interaction becomes an opportunity to learn from different perspectives. However, I find myself at a crossroads now, unsure of how to tackle my next challenge. It's a feeling that haunts many, doubt creeping in as I stand on the brink of the unknown, pondering whether I am ready to take the leap again. But if there's one lesson I hold dear, it's It's that tension is often where the magic happens. Real growth emerges during those moments of uncertainty when we confront what we didn't know we didn't know. As I prepare for the next chapter of my journey, I remind myself that a continuous learning mindset means diving headfirst into discomfort. It's about embracing the deeper questions and transforming fear into curiosity. I take a deep breath, grateful for the mentors who have guided me and the emotional experiences that have refined my path. Here I stand, ready to embark on yet another adventure, hoping to inspire others to chase the elusive spark of knowledge wherever it may lead. Feedback as a tool for growth. Walking into the office every morning felt like stepping onto a stage where I was both a performer and an audience member. The spotlight was always on, and my manager, Rebecca, was the unyielding critic, always ready with a sharp eye and a sharper tongue. At first, feedback felt like a heavy weight, a constant reminder of my limitations. But over time, I discovered a transformative power within those sharp critiques. I began to see them not as judgments, but as mirrors reflecting the areas I needed to refine. The unsettling reality of facing my flaws was daunting, but acknowledging them opened up a path to growth that I had never anticipated. Rebecca had a unique way of delivering feedback that cut through the noise. Instead of vague compliments or dismissive comments, she provided actionable insights that pinpointed specific areas for improvement. I remember one incident vividly. I had completed an analysis that I was initially quite proud of, convinced it was both thorough and insightful. But Rebecca had a different perspective. She gently pointed out that while my analysis was comprehensive, it lacked a clear structure. Rather than leaving me in despair, she suggested a new framework to follow, one that emphasized clarity and accessibility for the readers. With each critique, I felt myself facing a fork in the road. I could either recoil and resist, or I could embrace the discomfort as a catalyst for change. I chose the latter. Taking her feedback to heart, I began to experiment with my analytical style. I focused on refining my approach by actively engaging with the feedback loop, viewing it as a dance between Rebecca and me, each step an opportunity to learn and grow. I learned not only to digest her advice, but to channel it into tangible actions. It was exhilarating to witness my progress, to feel those pieces clicking into place as I developed a stronger foundation for my analytical work. I was not just growing in skill, but in confidence too. Looking back, it was the pain of criticism that ignited my passion for perfection. It ignited a desire to evolve my work into something more impactful. But just when I felt I was hitting my stride, a wave of feedback crashed over me that threatened to pull me under entirely. I had prepared an in-depth presentation for a crucial meeting, pouring my heart and soul into it. As I stood before my colleagues, I felt the rush of adrenaline, the thrill of sharing my work. The moment after, though, was a sharp jolt back to reality. Rebecca expressed her thoughts, cutting through the initial buzz of excitement. She pointed out glaring inaccuracies in my data interpretations and the lack of a clear narrative thread tying my findings together. It struck me like a thunderclap. I stood there, pinned between the realization of my shortcomings and the looming question of whether I would ever be good enough. That moment became a tipping point. Instead of drowning in embarrassment, I fought against the current of self-doubt. I scheduled a follow-up meeting with Rebecca. I needed to know, how could I turn this feedback into something that didn't just hurt, but propelled me forward? Her response was one of warmth and mentorship, guiding me on how to dissect my analysis further and elucidate my points with greater clarity. In that moment, I understood that feedback isn't merely about hearing what went wrong, it's about finding the way to right the ship. I left that meeting with a fire lit within me, the kind that made every setback feel manageable. With this knowledge in hand, I realized that embracing feedback had the power not just to shape my skills, but to redefine my entire career path. Building a support system. When I think back to the most pivotal moments in my life, I realized the common thread weaving through them wasn't just my determination or talent. It was the people who stood beside me. They were the silent partners in my life's journey, the unsung heroes who shaped my path. Surrounding myself with a supportive network has made all the difference, especially during times of uncertainty. It's easy to think we can tackle life alone, but I've learned firsthand that the power of community is paramount. I remember vividly the day I made the decision to pursue my dream career, one that felt not just challenging, but downright intimidating. I sat with my friend Sarah at our favorite coffee shop, nervously tapping my fingers against the table. "What if I fail?" I had exclaimed, half covered by the steam rising from my mug. But Sarah, with her unwavering belief in my potential, dismissed my fears with a simple, "What if you fly?" It was that moment, that belief echoed back to me at the right time. That stuck. It became clear that having people who believed in my vision was essential. Their encouragement acted as a safety net, allowing me to leap into the unknown without the fear of falling too hard. The significance of building a support system extends beyond mere encouragement. It's about surrounding ourselves with individuals who challenge, uplift, and inspire us. Psychology tells us that human connection is a fundamental aspect of overall well-being. Studies reveal that when we feel supported, we are more resilient against stress and more likely to pursue our goals. So I've made it a habit to curate my social circles, seeking those who ignite a spark in me rather than extinguish it. It's a conscious effort, but one that pays dividends, filling my life with positivity and constructive insights. Yet, it isn't enough just to have people around. We need to engage in genuine relationships. I found myself occasionally falling into the trap of superficial connections. People who were pleasant, but didn't really understand or support my ambitions. It was only when I began to invest time and energy into nurturing deeper bonds that my world expanded. Meaningful conversations, shared experiences, and even moments of vulnerability transformed acquaintances into allies. However, just as building a supportive network has its rewards, it comes with challenges too. There were instances when I felt let down by those I held dear. A promising friend turned out to be less supportive when I needed them most, which left a gaping hole in my heart. It's tough to realize that not everyone will stick around for your journey. Some are only meant to be part of specific chapters. But rather than dwelling on the disappointments, I learned to readjust. A support system is not static, it's organic, and may evolve as we do. This realization was hard-won, yet incredibly freeing. As I continued to build my network, I also sought to be an active supporter for others. During one particularly tumultuous period in my life, or what I lovingly called my quarter-life crisis, I became acutely aware of how much support I had received. That's when I made it a point to reach out to friends and colleagues who were facing their hurdles. There is something profoundly empowering about uplifting others. It creates an environment where everyone thrives, reinforcing the bonds within my network and solidifying my role as a contributor, not just a consumer of support. Yet, as I reflect on my own journey, I realize that the most powerful relationships are often forged in crisis. During those tough moments, the people who show up are invaluable. One night, after a particularly grueling week, I found myself on my living room floor, tears streaming down my face over a setback I had faced. Nearly an hour later, there was a knock. It was my friend Liam, pizza in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other, ready to offer not just food, but comfort. The immensity of that gesture reminded me that true support is about being present, even when it's inconvenient. Now, as I strive to build a network that thrives on authenticity, I remind myself that vulnerability is strength. Sharing struggles fosters connection, and admitting that I'm not okay sometimes encourages others to do the same. The truth is, we all navigate this winding road of life together, and there's power in knowing we're not alone. With this understanding, I've begun to embrace the unpredictable nature of relationships. They bring chaos, laughter, tears, and sometimes heartache. Yet, when we allow ourselves to truly invest in one another, the potential for growth becomes limitless. As I move forward, I carry with me the undeniable truth that while the road may be uncertain, I no longer fear the journey ahead. I have my support system to guide me through. Chapter 12, Overcoming Obstacles Facing Doubts, a Personal Narrative. It was a Monday morning when I first realized how crippling doubt can be. I sat at my kitchen table, fingers poised over a blank page, ready to begin the first draft of a novel that had been marinating in my mind for months. The clock ticked softly, but in my mind it screamed louder with a relentless urgency. What if I wasn't cut out for this? What if the story I had whispered to myself during sleepless nights was utterly ridiculous? Those questions clawed at me, pulling me deeper into a void of uncertainty. Doubt is a sly thief, isn't it? It sneaks in with the quietest of whispers, sowing seeds of insecurity where confidence once grew. As I sat there, flanked by shadows of my unfinished manuscripts, I couldn't help but recall a moment from my childhood that echoed the same feelings. It was the annual school play, and there I stood backstage, all dressed up but frozen in fear. With a heartbeat that resonated like thunder, I contemplated fleeing the theater, convinced my talent was a facade. But just as the curtain was about to rise, I felt my mother's hand on my shoulder and heard her steady voice, reminding me that I was capable. A reassuring presence that I desperately needed in that moment of hesitation. Your doubts can echo in the stillness of those early mornings or during a quiet evening. They can feel overwhelming, even paralyzing. But what I've learned since that incident with the play and through countless other moments of despair is the profound power of acknowledgement. I took a deep breath and acknowledged the doubts sitting beside me at the table. Okay, I see you, but you won't be the one to write this story, I thought, and started writing anyway. It was messy, riddled with errors, and at times the words felt wooden. Yet I felt a strange liberation in pushing through the doubt, much like I had felt stepping onto that stage. I discovered a remarkable truth. The act of creation itself became a balm, mending the wounds doubt had inflicted. But the road was not without its potholes. A few weeks later, after a burst of creativity, I found myself at a standstill again. This time, the doubts were louder, more boisterous. "Who do you think you are?" they mocked. "This is just foolishness." I scrolled through social media, drowning in images of writers who had seemingly made it, all while my manuscript gathered dust. I felt as if I was nearing the edge of a precipice, teetering between my ambitions and my insecurities. But that day, rather than diving into the abyss, I chose to reach out. I joined a local writing group. This was my turning point. Surrounded by others who shared their own battles with doubt, I found comfort in vulnerability. Their stories mirrored mine. Their fears reflected back at me, creating an environment of empathy and understanding. In these meetings, doubt transformed from an enemy to a familiar acquaintance, one that could be managed rather than obliterated. With each session, I shared snippets of my draft and listened with an open heart, allowing their feedback to guide me. Over time, I grasped a crucial lesson about doubt. It transforms as you grow. What once felt like shackles became stepping stones, propelling me forward with newfound clarity. Yet, just as I began to find my rhythm, an unexpected event threw me off course. I received a rejection letter for my first submission. The words sprawled across the page felt like cold water splashed on a warm summer day. They cut deep. "You're not good enough." The letter echoed in my mind, drowning out everything I had learned. The comfortable group meetings, the supportive friendships I had forged, all faded into the background. In that moment, I was back at the kitchen table, paralyzed by the same old doubts. But this time, I refused to let doubt win. Instead of flinging my draft into oblivion, I took it out, reread what I had written, and sought the support of my writing group once more. Together, we dissected it. They reminded me that rejections were merely stepping stones, an opportunity to grow stronger and more resilient. With their encouragement, I revised my work, revised my narrative about doubt, and transformed rejection into a call to action rather than an end. And in doing so, I regained my footing, ready to submit again, armed with wisdom and support. The role of resilience in critical thinking. Resilience is a word that often gets thrown around in self-help books and motivational speeches. But what does it really mean? For me, resilience is like a muscle, something that we can strengthen over time through practice and experience. I remember a time when I faced a significant challenge at work. A project I had poured my heart into went south in ways I couldn't have predicted. My initial response was panic, fueled by self-doubt and anxiety. The weight of the setback threatened to crush my spirit. But as the dust settled, I realized I had a choice: to spiral further down or to stand up, dust myself off, and think critically about what had gone wrong. That moment was a turning point. Instead of dwelling in despair, I started analyzing the failures to identify the root causes. This involved asking hard questions. What decisions did I make that could have been different? Did I communicate effectively with my team? Was I open to feedback throughout the process? Resilience fostered a mindset of curiosity over judgment, allowing me to dissect the situation without self-recrimination. It's fascinating how resilience feeds into critical thinking. When we're faced with adversity, our natural instinct might be to retreat or rationalize our failures. But resilience pushes us to confront those failures head-on, asking us not just to react, but to reflect and learn. It becomes a foundational pillar for our ability to think critically. As I began to embrace this notion, I started applying it more broadly in my life. I began viewing problems not as insurmountable obstacles, but as puzzles to solve. Each setback became a lesson, each stumble an opportunity. For example, when a friend faced a personal crisis, I found myself guiding them through it using the same principles I had learned in the workplace. I encouraged them to take a step back, analyze their feelings and reactions, and evaluate the choices in front of them. Together, we broke down their emotional upheaval, turning chaos into clarity. In that moment, I realized the transformative power of combining resilience with critical thinking, not just for ourselves, but for those around us. But it's not always that straightforward. As I continued to explore this relationship, I encountered situations where my resilience wavered, where even the strongest convictions could buckle under pressure. One Saturday, while volunteering at a local community kitchen, I was faced with the enormity of the need around me. I remember looking at the long line of people waiting for a meal, feeling overwhelmed by their struggles and the societal systems that had failed them. I had come to help, but the weight of reality pressed hard on my chest, threatening to extinguish my resolve. In that moment, critical thinking felt like a distant echo. Yet, this is where resilience emerged as my lifeline. It provided the energy to pull myself from the depths of despair, urging me to focus on what I could control, how I interacted with each person I served. That day taught me yet another layer of how resilience and critical thinking interplay in our lives. Sometimes it's not about fixing everything, but about showing up, even when that feels impossibly daunting. I realized that as much as I wanted to offer solutions for the greater issues at hand, what mattered more was creating meaningful connections in the moment, addressing individual needs rather than overwhelming myself with the systemic failures surrounding them. As I poured soup and shared a smile, I found clarity in my purpose, grounding my thoughts in the present rather than spiraling into despair. Through that act of service, I learned that even my smallest gestures could have lasting impacts. In the gathering storm of emotions and crises, resilience became my beacon, navigating me back to critical thinking. So how do we cultivate this resilience to improve our critical thinking skills? First, we need to embrace vulnerability. Allowing ourselves to feel, to mourn our failures, or to face our fears is the precursor to growth. Secondly, we should practice reflection regularly. Journaling, meditation, or simply taking quiet moments to think can help in processing our experiences and emotions. Finally, we must surround ourselves with people who encourage resilience in us, who can challenge us to think critically while reminding us that it's okay not to have all the answers. The end of the chapter in my personal journey was not simply about learning from failure, but recognizing that resilience can be the key to unlocking a new way of approaching life. Just as I stood in that community kitchen feeling overwhelmed, I encourage you to reflect on your challenges. What happens when you harness resilience to fuel your critical thinking? As I'm learning, the answer could change everything. Overcoming mental blocks. As I sat at my desk, staring blankly at a screen filled with empty white space, I felt that familiar sense of dread creeping in. It was a mental block, a particularly stubborn one that seemed to tether my creativity to the chair. I could almost hear the ticking clock mocking me, each second a reminder of the ideas that were dancing just beyond my reach. It was frustrating, navigating through layers of self-doubt and anxiety, emotions I knew all too well. But what if I told you that the key to overcoming such blocks lies in understanding them rather than succumbing to them? Research tells us that mental blocks are not insurmountable barriers. They're often signs of deeper issues that we need to unpack. After all, I had spent years battling the shadows of perfectionism. Each time I aimed for flawlessness, I found myself paralyzed, fearing that I'd never meet my own impossibly high standards. I vividly remember a time during my college years when a tight deadline rendered me incapable of producing a single coherent sentence. In that moment of pressure, I realized that the need to be perfect had stripped me of my passion, choking my creative spirit. Through a lot of trial and error, I discovered simple yet effective strategies to break free from these mental shackles. One method that worked wonders for me was free writing. Every morning, I gave myself permission to write without judgment. It didn't have to make sense, and it certainly didn't have to be good. I poured my thoughts onto the page unfiltered, letting them flow like a river. The act of shifting my focus from quality to quantity worked like magic, slowly chipping away at the block, and soon, ideas emerged that I never knew existed. It was as if my mind had cleared the fog, revealing a hidden landscape of creativity waiting to be explored. However, as I ventured deeper into my writing journey, I encountered something unexpected, a fear that was even more entrenched than perfectionism. Just as I began to find my flow, whispers of inadequacy crept back in. What if people don't like this? And what if I fail to resonate with my audience? These thoughts threatened to sink my newfound momentum. I realized that tackling mental blocks was not just about creative strategies. It was also about fostering resilience. I began to embrace vulnerability and see the beauty in shared experiences, reminding myself that everyone struggles with their inner demons. As I started opening up about my fears, both to myself and others, I found an unexpected source of strength: community. I began attending writing workshops where the shared stories created a safe space to explore our insecurities together. We rallied around each other, proving time and again that vulnerability could be a catalyst for growth. But the journey is not linear, and the night of my big presentation loomed closer. The pressure was mounting as I prepared to present my work to a room full of seasoned writers. The voices of doubt became louder, and I wondered if I was ready to face the very audience that once intimidated me beyond belief. I understood then that it was not merely about overcoming the block. It was about embracing the whole spectrum of this creative experience, from the highs to the lows, from the clarity to the chaos. The night before the presentation was a whirlwind of emotion. I felt the weight of expectation returning to my chest. In those moments, I channeled my fear into preparation. I reminded myself of the journey, the growth, and the people who stood by me. And as the lights dimmed and I stepped onto the stage, there it was, a curious blend of fear and exhilaration. I had confronted my mental blocks, and in that confrontation, I found not just clarity, but also confidence. The essence of overcoming mental blocks lies in acknowledging them, understanding our patterns, and employing practical strategies to navigate through them. Life is unpredictable, filled with twists and turns that challenge our very core. But amidst it all, remember that your creativity is like a muscle. It needs to be exercised, even on days when you feel utterly uninspired. And just like that, as I stood there presenting my work, I realized that this journey was about so much more than just writing. It was about finding the courage to connect and share my authentic self with the world. So the next time you face a mental block, embrace it, learn from it, and know that you have the power to break through and soar. Chapter 13. Critical Thinking in Relationships, Effective Communication Strategies. It's funny how we often take communication for granted. We talk, we listen, and we assume the message flows seamlessly from one mind to another. But I learned the hard way that this isn't always true. I remember a project meeting where I thought I had clearly articulated my vision for a new marketing campaign. I went in full of enthusiasm, but when I finished, there was a deafening silence. The blank stares in the room told me everything. I had failed to connect. That day marked the beginning of my journey towards understanding effective communication. What I discovered is that effective communication isn't just about speaking clearly. It's about connecting with others on a deeper level. For instance, I started to pay attention to nonverbal cues, body language, eye contact, even the pauses in conversation. The more I tuned into these signals, the more I realized that what's often left unsaid carries just as much weight as the spoken word. I began practicing active listening, which transformed my conversations. Instead of waiting for my turn to speak, I found myself genuinely engaging with others, asking questions that prompted deeper discussions. One of the most important strategies I adopted was the art of storytelling. People connect with stories on a visceral level. During that same project meeting, I decided to share a personal anecdote related to the campaign. As I recounted my experience, I noticed the room shift. Eyes lit up, nods of recognition spread, and suddenly we were all on the same wavelength. I learned that when you frame your message within the context of a story, it becomes relatable, memorable, and impactful. But here's the kicker. As I continued to refine my communication skills, I encountered a really tough situation. A colleague and I had a serious disagreement over the direction of our project, and tempers flared. I had my perspective, he had his, and the stakes felt higher than ever. I could sense the frustration simmering just beneath the surface, and for a moment, I felt anxious. Would our project unravel because of it? But instead of letting the tension escalate, I paused. I took a deep breath and recalled all I had learned about effective communication. I leaned into the discomfort and chose to listen. I asked him to share his viewpoint fully before interjecting with my own. What unfolded was surprising. Through that conversation, we discovered common ground, and our collaboration flourished. If there's one valuable lesson I can impart, it's that effective communication strategies are not merely about tactics. They revolve around empathy and understanding. Yes, you can learn techniques to articulate your messages better, but without genuine connection, your words can fall flat. In the end, every conversation is an opportunity, not just to be heard, but to forge connections, resolve conflicts, and inspire change. As I sit here, reflecting on my own journey, I realize that the path towards effective communication requires both courage and practice, but the rewards are more than worth it. And that, dear reader, is just the beginning of my story. Living proof that the art of communication can indeed change lives. Building trust through understanding. It struck me one afternoon that trust, much like a delicate vase, requires a particular care. One wrong move or a careless gesture, and it shatters. This revelation came after a year of struggling to connect with my neighbor, Mr. Thompson. He was a quiet man, often seen tending to his garden, his brow furrowed as if the secrets of the universe were locked within the soil. Initially, I had been intimidated by his reclusive nature, but curiosity nudged me forward. I found myself yearning for connection and eager to build a bridge of trust that felt unsteady. Over several weeks, I made small gestures, friendly nods, a wave from my porch. Each interaction was like dipping my toe in a cold pool, hesitant yet hopeful. One day, I decided to bake a batch of cookies, a simple act meant to break the ice. As I rang his doorbell, my stomach knotted with anticipation. When he opened the door, surprise flickered in his eyes, followed by an unmistakable warmth. "Thank you," he said, accepting the plate. It was an ordinary moment, yet it felt monumental. I could sense the familiar foundation of trust beginning to form, however fragile. With each passing week, our conversations grew longer, evolving from brief pleasantries to deeper exchanges. I learned about his love for classic literature and his passion for gardening, weaving shared interests into our dialogues. There was a pivotal moment when I revealed my own struggles with anxiety, allowing insight into my vulnerabilities. His expression softened, and in that small, secure space between us, I felt a shift. He shared a personal story about his late wife. This exchange deepened our connection. Understanding each other's stories helped pave the path towards the trust we were building. Yet, just when I thought we were making strides, a storm brewed. An incident involving vandalism in our neighborhood sparked tension. It was rumored that Mr. Thompson was the prime suspect due to his solitary habits. I stood at a crossroads, torn between the neighborhood's concern and my growing bond with him. The whispers stung. I could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on me. Should I confront him, or would that fracture the trust we had worked so hard to establish? My instincts screamed for me to protect our newfound relationship. while my rational mind feared what would happen if I ignored the doubts festering in the community. That night, I wrestled with countless scenarios, my mind racing. The weight of potential betrayal loomed large, casting shadows over our connection. The silence stretched on as I drifted towards sleep, but I knew I had to confront the issue. It was not just about Mr. Thompson anymore. It was about the essence of trust and understanding in relationships. Trust cannot exist in a vacuum. It is built, tested, and sometimes fractured. I would have to choose, and I was afraid that choosing wrong could mean losing everything I had pieced together. The next morning, as the sun filtered through my window, I realized I had a decision to make, one that could either reinforce the trust we were building or threaten to dismantle it entirely. I sat at my kitchen table, heart pounding, fingers trembling over my phone. Texting him felt daunting, but avoiding the truth felt riskier. I composed a message, part panic and part purpose, and pressed send. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach as I awaited his response, acutely aware that this was just the beginning of yet another pivotal moment in our tentative friendship. Conflict resolution techniques. I remember a time when my colleague Sarah and I found ourselves at an impasse over a project. It was a classic case of differing perspectives. I was focused on the details, while she had her eyes set on the bigger picture. Our discussions often escalated into heated debates, and each meeting ended with both of us digging our heels in deeper. One afternoon, as we sat across from each other in a small conference room, I realized that we had to find a way to navigate the conflict instead of letting it simmer beneath the surface. This moment sparked my interest in exploring conflict resolution techniques. The first technique I discovered was active listening, a simple yet profound skill that transformed our interactions. It's not just about hearing words, it's about understanding the emotions and intentions behind them. I started intentionally paraphrasing Sarah's points. So what I hear you saying is that you're concerned about the long-term implications of our current strategy. This shift did wonders. It not only validated her feelings, but also created a space for her to reciprocate. She began to listen to my details with the same respect. Suddenly, our conflict morphed into a collaborative problem-solving session rather than a battleground. Another technique that proved invaluable was the art of seeking common ground. During a particularly tense discussion, I proposed that we list our shared goals. As we scribbled down our objectives, successfully launching the project, meeting deadlines, and ensuring team satisfaction, a palpable shift occurred. We both realized that despite our different approaches, we were ultimately on the same team. This realization was like pouring cold water on a campfire. The flames of our conflict began to die down. Yet, after a few sessions of smooth sailing, we hit turbulence once more, and I began to wonder if we had truly resolved the underlying issues. It wasn't until a project deadline loomed and stress levels escalated that the conflict resurfaced with full force. Sarah frustratedly criticized my meticulous approach, saying it was slowing us down. In that moment, I felt my defenses rising, but I remembered a crucial technique: taking a timeout. I suggested we take a brief break to cool off. That pause allowed us to reflect instead of react, and when we reconvened, we were both more level-headed. Taking a timeout helped us view the situation more objectively, and it was during that moment of reflection that I really needed to put ourselves in each other's shoes. The role of empathy cannot be overstated in conflict resolution. I began to actively express understanding for her perspective, saying things like, "I know you feel pressed for time, and I get the urgency you're feeling." This invited a shift in the tone, resembling a door being unlocked rather than a wall being built. As we navigated this rocky terrain together, I felt something deeper pull us through, a mutual respect that blossomed from our shared challenge. Despite the progress we made, sometimes the tension built up to a boiling point. One afternoon, a disagreement over budget allocations ignited a fierce argument. I felt like a dam bursting, and as mean-spirited words flew across the table, I feared we'd irreparably damaged our working relationship. That evening, I reflected on my approach to conflict resolution and realized I hadn't been addressing the emotional aspects adequately. I knew the next steps were not just to resolve the conflict, but also to mend the fraying threads of our partnership. In the days that followed, I reached out to Sarah and suggested a coffee chat, one devoid of project talk, just an honest conversation. Over steaming mugs of coffee, we explored not just our viewpoints, but also our feelings. This vulnerability opened the door to genuine connection, leading to breakthroughs in our collaborative style. Through these experiences, I learned that conflict resolution requires presence, patience, and the willingness to share deeply. By this point, I no longer just wanted to solve conflicts. I wanted to create a collaborative culture that could withstand the inevitable bumps along the way. As I reflect on these experiences, I recognize the ongoing journey of mastering conflict resolution. We're still imperfect, still learning. However, our relationship has grown stronger, rooted in techniques that promote clarity and warmth amidst disagreement. That lingering tension I once felt is now replaced with the excitement of facing challenges together, knowing we have the tools at our disposal to not just survive, but thrive through conflict. Chapter 14, The Future of Analytical Skills, Tech Influence, the Digital Age. It's a curious thing, this intimacy we share with our devices. I can still remember the first time I held a smartphone in my hand. My world expanded in a way I never thought possible. Suddenly, not only was I connected to friends and family in real time, but I also had access to a universe of information at my fingertips. What initially felt like magic soon morphed into a whirlwind of distractions. I found myself mining Instagram for likes, scrolling endlessly through news feeds, all while struggling to maintain genuine real-life connections. The digital age isn't just about the convenience of finding a quick answer or the thrill of beating your high score in a game. It's a double-edged sword, delicately positioned to cut through the fabric of our daily lives. I often wonder, what does it mean for us to be so intertwined with our devices? How have we allowed this tech influence to shape our identities? At times, I feel like a spectator in a vast digital society. With every lively debate I witness on social media, I can't help but feel both thrilled and terrified. For every enriching conversation is shadowed by a potential tide of misinformation and division. As I became more aware of this digital culture, I decided to consciously curate my online experience. I started filling my feed with voices I genuinely admired, authors, educators, and activists who spoke truthfully about the pressing issues of our times. Yet, there was a surreal moment that halted my inspired trajectory. I received a message that challenged my perspective so profoundly, it shook the grounds of my digital engagement. A friend I respected sent me a video that argued the very importance of unplugging and reassessing our relationship with technology. It felt almost like a wake-up call, urging me to scrutinize the countless hours I surrendered to the algorithms. What if they were leading me astray? This internal conflict spiraled into a larger conversation with those around me. I started noticing the peculiar patterns. Family dinners punctuated by the pings of notifications, friendships feeling strained in the wake of misinterpreted texts. We were heading towards a reckoning. My insatiable thirst for knowledge began to feel more like a mindless consumption, and the fleeting joys of connection were shadowed by an overwhelming sense of disconnection. As the clock ticks down on my reflections, I can't shake the feeling we are perched on a precipice, teetering between profound innovation and capitulation to our devices. This tension looms. We are marionettes dancing to the whims of our screens, but I can't help but dream of redefining what it means to truly connect, beyond the blue light, back to the warmth of face-to-face moments. Adapting skills for new environments. The first time I stepped into a bustling city that was deafeningly foreign to me, I stumbled through a chaotic swirl of sounds and sights. Cars honked impatiently, while pedestrians flowed like a river, each individual navigating their own path with unwavering purpose. I felt like a leaf being tossed in the wind. Since then, I've learned that adapting to new environments requires more than just understanding the physical landscape. It calls for a toolbox of skills that can be applied in any situation. As I stood there, absorbing it all, I realized that the key was not just to survive, but to thrive. In my early career, I found myself in a variety of workplaces, from the quiet confines of a library to the vibrant buzz of a tech startup. Each setting presented its own culture and nuances. I remember my first day at a startup. I walked in ready for a conventional workday, only to be met with a colorful array of bean bags and informal brainstorming sessions. That day, I learned the first and perhaps the most vital skill, flexibility. It was essential to trade my structured mindset for one that welcomed spontaneity. I started to embrace discomfort, which soon became exhilarating. I took on challenges that pushed my boundaries, and surprisingly, I found my footing with ease. As I navigated these diverse environments, I began to realize that effective communication was another crucial aspect. In the startup, for example, expressing ideas clearly was just as important as thinking outside the box. Conversing over coffee felt entirely different than the formality of a boardroom meeting. I experimented by engaging in small talk, exchanging ideas, and building relationships. My fear of rejection slowly dissipated, replaced by a sense of connection to my coworkers. Each interaction taught me how to adapt my communication style to fit the surrounding energy, which led to fruitful collaborations and lasting friendships. Time passed, and I found myself in yet another new environment, a foreign country where I barely spoke the language. It was like stepping into a profound silence, where my usual tools for interaction felt clumsy. However, I was armed with my growing adaptability skills. I immersed myself in the culture, learned basic phrases, and actively sought common ground with locals. Embracing vulnerability became a game changer. I asked questions, made mistakes, and laughed at myself when I occasionally mixed up words. With every blunder came a lesson, and with every lesson came a deeper understanding of the world around me. As I reflect on these experiences, I realize that the journey of adaptation is an ongoing process filled with rich lessons. Yet just as I began to feel confident, the universe threw me a curveball. I received an unexpected job offer that required me to relocate to a country where not only was the language foreign, but the work culture was starkly different from anything I had ever known. My stomach knotted with anxiety at the thought. Would I be able to adapt again? Could I peel back the layers of this new environment and find my place? As I pondered these questions, I remembered all that I had learned. The realization that every new challenge was simply another opportunity for growth sparked a flicker of hope. With this opportunity looming, I took a moment to prepare. I sought out resources to familiarize myself with the culture, connected with colleagues on social media before the big move, and even practiced small talk in front of the mirror. Each step infused me with confidence, and there I was, armed with my triumphs over uncertainty and the echoes of past experiences urging me forward. The clock was ticking, and soon I would find out just how well I could adapt once again. The role of critical thinking in society. It was a warm Saturday afternoon when my youngest daughter, Lily, sat at the kitchen table, her brow furrowed in concentration as she tackled her homework. I could hear her muttering to herself, piecing together the fragments of information like she was solving a puzzle. At that moment, I was reminded of how vital critical thinking is in our everyday lives, shaping the way we understand and interact with the world around us. It's not just about acing a test. It's the foundation of informed decision-making, civic responsibility, and meaningful conversations. As adults, we often take our ability to think critically for granted, but it's a skill that needs to be nurtured, especially in a society overflowing with information and a cacophony of opinions. I remembered a few months back when I attended a community meeting where local issues were debated. The conversation ranged from environmental policy to public health, and I watched as many people fell into the trap of emotional reasoning, choosing sides based on gut feelings rather than solid evidence. It struck me that a lot of folks were not engaging their critical faculties. Instead, they were merely echoing the loudest voices in the room. It reinforced my belief that the ability to critically analyze information and arguments is not just an academic exercise. It's essential for our shared well-being. Turning the pages of my reflection, I realized that critical thinking is akin to a muscle. The more we exercise it, the stronger it becomes. I often try to lead by example, whether it's in a family discussion about current events or during a casual chat with friends. I remember last Thanksgiving when the topic of climate change came up around the dinner table. Instead of letting emotions dictate the conversation, I gently encouraged everyone to share their thoughts, but rooted in facts. I recounted recent studies and asked questions that prompted my family members to consider alternative perspectives. By doing so, we engaged in a healthier dialogue, one where critical thinking propelled us forward rather than dividing us further. But here's where things get tense. In a world where misinformation can spread like wildfire, how can we equip ourselves and future generations to discern fact from fallacy? I often reflect on the possibility that our society could become more driven by rhetoric and less by reason if we don't foster critical thinking skill sets. The thought aches in my heart. I don't want my children to inhabit a world where they swallow information whole without a second thought. So I take every chance I can to instill in them the habit of questioning and exploring, of not taking everything at face value. As I listen to Lily finally triumph over her homework, I feel a swell of hope. It's not just her academic success that matters. It's the critical thinking skills she is developing. She asks why and how do you know, with a curiosity that I fully support. I recognize that the role of critical thinking in society extends far beyond the classroom. It's a guiding principle for all of us, a beacon in the stormy seas of information. The urgency to embrace critical thinking, to actively choose it in our personal and community lives, has never felt more pressing. As I sat at that kitchen table with her, I made a silent vow to continue the conversation, to encourage the questions, and to model the very practice of critical thinking that I wish to see flourish. We simply cannot afford to let it die out in the face of uncertainty and chaos. Chapter 15. The Journey Continues. Reflections on My Growth. As I sit by the window, the early morning light spilling into my small, cluttered study, I find myself lost in thoughts about the winding path of my life thus far. It feels surreal to reflect on the changes I've experienced over the years. I remember the anxiety of my teenage years, the uncertainty that clung to me like a shadow. The first time I stood in front of a crowd, my voice shaking and palms clammy, feeling as though I were stripped bare, exposed to the judgment of my peers. It was a pivotal moment for me, one that sparked both embarrassment and a fierce desire to grow. In conversations with others who face similar moments, I've learned that vulnerability often serves as a catalyst for personal growth. The experiences we dislike or fear can be transformative. I remember a time when I stumbled through a presentation at school. I felt like I had fallen into a deep pit. Instead of simply hating that moment, I took a step back. I started recording myself, practicing in front of friends, and slowly but surely I transformed that pit of despair into a platform of learning. Each stumble became a stepping stone, pushing me to not just speak, but to connect, to engage, and eventually to inspire. As I grew older, I began to understand that growth doesn't just happen in one area of life. It's a multifaceted journey. When I moved to a new city, I felt as if I had once again jumped into the deep end. Everything felt foreign, the streets unfamiliar, the faces strange, but within that discomfort, I discovered an oasis of opportunity. I ventured to local cafes, struck up conversations with baristas, and joined community groups. I learned that every person had a story to share, and in those stories, I found pieces of myself, struggles, dreams, and aspirations reflected back at me. Each encounter further enriched my understanding, showing me that growth is not a solitary pursuit. It thrives on connection and community. As I continue to reflect, the most profound shifts often came during moments of crisis. Take the time when I had to face a significant personal loss. I would never have anticipated the depths of despair I would plummet into. It felt as though time stood still while I struggled to grasp what moving forward even looked like. But from that darkness emerged resilience. I leaned into creativity, giving voice to my grief through writing, capturing memories and emotions that felt too heavy to carry alone. From pain, I found the strength to advocate for mental health awareness, transforming what could have consumed me into a driving force for change. I began to see challenges not as mere obstacles, but as opportunities to evolve. Reflecting on these moments, I can't help but wonder how many others are holding on to their own stories of growth and transformation. Every experience, every bruised knee, and every moment of doubt has contributed to the person I am today. I've woven my past into a tapestry that celebrates both the painful and joyful threads, realizing that they make the fabric of my existence richer. So as I conclude this chapter of my reflections, I urge you, dear reader, to take a moment to examine your own journey. In recognizing your own growth, I hope you'll feel inspired to embrace the beauty of transformation and the opportunity that lies within every unfamiliar situation, every moment of discomfort. After all, our greatest strengths often blossom from the seeds of our most challenging experiences. Encouragement to others. It's interesting how a few kind words can alter the trajectory of someone's day, or even their life. I once found myself sitting on a park bench, watching the world go by, deeply wrapped up in my thoughts. I was in my own head, thinking about my failures and missed opportunities, when I overheard a conversation nearby. A mother was comforting her son, who had just come off the soccer field after a tough game. His face was flushed with embarrassment, tears welling at the corners of his eyes. "You did your best, and that's what matters," she said, her voice laced with warmth. In that moment, I was reminded of the power of encouragement. It dawned on me that we all wear invisible armor made of words, and sometimes just a little boost is all we need to keep fighting our battles. Deciding to dive deeper into the concept of encouragement, I began reflecting on my own experiences. There was a particularly bleak phase in my life when I was questioning everything: my career choices, my relationships, even my self-worth. It was during a coffee shop conversation with a friend that I began to see the light again. "You have so much potential," he said, almost as if he was peeling back layers of self-doubt that I had wrapped around myself. His genuine belief in my abilities sparked a flicker of hope within me. It's often in those unguarded moments we share our vulnerabilities that the seeds of encouragement can take root. Life can be heavy, but the right words have the potential to lift that weight, even just for a moment. As I navigated through my journey of learning how to uplift others, I discovered strategies I wished I had known before. Simple gestures, like sending a text to check in on someone or offering to grab coffee with a friend who seems down, can make a world of difference. Encouragement doesn't always have to be a grand display. It often lies in our smallest actions. Moreover, I found that being specific in our praise amplifies its impact. Remembering to celebrate not just the successes, but the efforts taken along the way fosters a culture of resilience. Encouragement builds bridges, connects souls, and reminds us that we are never alone in our struggles. But as I fell deeper into these practices, a nagging thought gnawed at me. What if, in my quest to lift others, I neglected my own need for encouragement? And then, one evening, it happened. A close friend reached out, visibly distraught, and I found the roles reversed. I suddenly saw through the eyes of someone who needed the very support I had been trying to give. It brought to light an essential truth: encouragement is a two-way street. By allowing others to uplift me, I realized that mutual support is what makes the world go round. It creates a cycle of kindness and understanding that can indeed change lives. But as I shared my thoughts and offered solace, I felt a tension building within me, a fear of not being enough, of not saying the right words. Was I truly equipped to comfort another when I was still fighting my own battles? This thought lingered as I sat there, listening intently, but it also urged me to push through. Perhaps courage doesn't mean being unaffected by our emotions, but rather acting despite them. So as we wind this journey together, let's venture beyond our comfort zones. Let's not only encourage others, but allow ourselves to be encouraged too. After all, we are all scribblers in the margins of each other's stories, striving to help one another write the next chapter. Setting future intentions. As I sat in my favorite corner of the cafe, the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee enveloped me, wrapping me in warmth akin to a soft blanket. It was one of those rare moments when the chaos of life faded into the background, leaving me with only the flutter of possibility. My journal lay open before me, its pages whispering the promise of new beginnings. Introspection has always been my compass. It guides me as I navigate the often turbulent waters of existence. In that cozy nook, surrounded by the murmurs of distant conversations, a thought crystallized in my mind. I needed to set intentions for my future. But what did it mean to set intentions? To many, it might sound like just another buzzword tossed around in the realm of self-help. Yet, as I leaned back in my chair, I recalled the transformative power behind these simple yet profound declarations. They weren't just wishes flung into the universe. They were beacons shining through the fog of uncertainty, guiding me towards my aspirations. I remembered a time when I had laid down intentions that felt impossibly ambitious, starting that blog, traveling solo, or even running a marathon. I chuckled at the naivety of it all. But looking back now, those seemingly out-of-reach dreams had subtly woven themselves into my life. I had become the architect of my own narrative. The act of setting future intentions is akin to planting seeds in the fertile soil of the mind. Each intention sprouts possibilities that grow, twist, and flourish over time. But like any gardener will tell you, the key isn't just in planting, it's in nurturing that growth. Intentions need action, a conscious effort that transforms vague ideas into tangible realities. It's not enough to scribble down a list and hope for the best. It involves a commitment to show up, to take risks, and sometimes even to fail. As I scribbled my intentions onto the pages of my journal, I felt a spark ignite within me, an exhilarating mix of nervousness and excitement. However, amid the thrill of painting my future, a shadow loomed. What if I fell short? What if life threw unexpected hurdles my way, as it often tends to do? Those questions tugged at my heart, a reminder of the weight that accompanies ambition. Yet I couldn't allow fear to snuff out my spark. I remembered a phrase I had once encountered. Courage doesn't mean not having fear, it means taking action in spite of it. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a golden hue through the cafe windows, I took a deep breath, allowing the warmth of my intentions to blanket the doubts lingering in the corners of my mind. As the night grew darker, my thoughts became punctuated with clarity. Intentions weren't merely about what I wanted, they were about who I aimed to become. I envisaged moments in the future defined not just by achievements, but by the essence of my character, the generosity of spirit, resilience in the face of adversity, and a sense of connection with those around me. Intention setting required an honesty that unveiled my deepest desires, while also acknowledging the shadows of self-doubt. And in this acknowledgement sprung the most profound realization: my future intentions must come from a place of authenticity. With my pen poised delicately over the page, I felt an urge to dive deeper into my intentions. What if they could be more than goals? What if they could transform into promises to myself? Promises of growth, exploration, and love, each one representing a step towards the abundant life I craved. Yet, amidst the warm glow of ambition, the notion of living authentically sparked a new wave of unease. What exactly did I want to promise myself? What if the pursuit of these intentions led me far from the paths I was currently wandering? As those thoughts spiraled through my mind like autumn leaves caught in a whirlwind, I plugged into my breath. The cafe grew quiet, the world outside blurred, and for a moment, it was just me, my intentions, and the gripping uncertainty of the future. The tension was palpable. I could almost feel it sparkling in the air around me. Either I would remain tied to the familiar, or I could leap into the unknown, fueled by my own aspirations. The thrill of it all sent shivers down my spine. I closed my eyes, allowing the possibilities to swirl around. The smell of coffee mingled with the sweet scent of newfound courage, whispering to me, "Embrace the tension. It's where growth begins." Thank you for joining us on this journey through critical thinking essentials, boosting your analytical skills. We hope this audiobook has provided you with valuable insights and practical tools to enhance your analytical abilities. Critical thinking is more than just a skill. It's a mindset that can transform how we interact with the world. As you continue to apply these principles in your daily life, remember that the journey doesn't end here. Continuous learning and self-improvement are key to mastering critical thinking and adapting to new challenges and opportunities. We encourage you to reflect on what you've learned, practice these techniques regularly, and share your knowledge with others. Together, we can cultivate a community of thoughtful, discerning individuals who value clarity, empathy, and informed decision-making. Stay curious, keep questioning, and never stop learning. Thank you for choosing Mindful Literary as your guide on this path. Until next time, keep exploring and growing.